frozen conflicts.
Thank you. I guess a lot of people are going to be talking about Georgia because I see it from the program, so I would not go into details, I guess, of the Georgia conflict itself, but I'll try to equate some of the parallels as well as the lessons. But before that, I'll go into a bit of historic context of how I see things and how things went for Georgia, but also for the wider region. Of course, one thing that we can see definitely is the emergence of the problems that we are facing right now, stemming from the 90s. And in 90s, there were many things which actually predisposed us to face these problems. And of course, one of the things I have to point out was the disengagement of the West during those times. And I think when we talk about this, we have to see that there are certain parallels that we see right now. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, there was definitely a desire in Moscow to keep the tabs on the new republics. Of course, there was less of an understanding of a cohesive policy of how it should look. It was very loose, but there was still a thinking that Russia should be present and Russia should be a player when it comes to the fate of these countries. And of course, if we look at the succession of events which took place across the regions and in all the countries that we are talking today, we'll see that there is a very clear Russian trace. And of course, the biggest problems which were not really that evident during those times, but when we analyze it right now in retrospect, we see that there are a lot of commonalities. And of course, when we're talking about the problems itself, and we have to identify the problems with elites, the local elites who actually saw the opportunity to advance their own goal, which was very much supported by the Russians during those times. So the elites did play the role. Of course, there was a problem of weak governments. That was the problem across all the states. Unfortunately, Georgia is a very, very stark example of this, and the lack of capacity to actually perform the state functions was one of the biggest problems during those times. Of course, internal divisions, which was very much played out also sometimes by Russian interests present in our country. Of course, it was about the very understanding of nationalism, which actually played the very, I'd say, dysfunctional role, but not the main role, as some of the experts would like to talk about it, branding it mostly as an ethno conflict, which I will definitely not agree about. I think it's a political conflict if one wants to look at it from different perspectives. So the Russia itself, just to go back to the premise that Russia itself was very loose inside, so they didn't have their own thinking about the region. Okay, they did have this intention to control it. They did have an intention to be present when it comes to be the resolution of the conflict or some type of the future of the conflict. But they lacked the cohesive, let's say, vision. Of course, they didn't obstruct them from being actually part of the post-conflict arrangements. And if we look at the post-conflict arrangements, let it be the peace arrangements, which, I mean, peacemaking arrangements or the peacekeeping arrangements or whatever, you see that there is a very common trait of the Russian presence there. I mean, if we look at the Dagomis Accords, which actually basically created the South Ossetia peacekeeping process, you'll see that the very structure of it was very much predisposed to create the preconditions for Georgia to be underrepresented. I mean, it was basically Russia together with North Ossetia, which was basically a cover for South Ossetia as well as and then Georgia. The same exact logic was applied, by the way, in Transnistria, where the same footprint was used. Also, we had the OSCE there involved as well. So you can say that, you know, that's a mirror of what happened in South Ossetia context. But then there was an interesting development of the Abkhaz direction, where we had the CIS being part of it, as Russia kind of took up the role role where it was represented as a peacekeeper, which was assigned by the CIS. There was an appeal from the Georgia during those times because Georgia was feeling extremely weak, as I said, because of the weak central government, because of the very domestically, I would say, domestic weaknesses that Georgia was prone to be vulnerable to. So what we are getting there is that the cobwebs that Russia has been building were very much along the lines of divide and rule, but at the same time, I would like to make a clear point that it was problem of the West as well, because West was largely disengaged. And I don't want to equate it with the problems that we're facing right now, but definitely that was the biggest problem. Why? Because no one actually was thinking enough about the strategic connotation of what was happening in the region during those times, because everyone was in the mood of this so-called post-Cold War victorious flair. Everyone was thinking that Russia was too weak, which was, I mean, there were some grounds to say that they were not the major power during those times, but still this whole understanding that Russia was too weak, there was no desire to be involved here. We have to talk about the United States during those times, which was actually not very outside looking, and the Clintons' first term was the glare, let's say, example of this. Of course, the second term was definitely not the same because of many reasons, but even during those times, with the appointment of Madeleine Albright, you know, the whole aspect of the U.S. policy was directed towards Balkans. So the Balkans became the new, let's say, a preoccupation of the West, which I would say very much created the impression that the region that we are representing was not a priority region. And in many ways, whatever we are getting as a legacy stems from the fact that this region was disregarded for quite some time. Of course, with the ascension of Putin, this whole perception of the weakness and the whole perception of the Russia's incohesive policies have started to be diminishing. And I'll try to give you my perspective of what we are witnessing right now in Crimea and how the roots of this have been actually starting from the early 2000s. Of course, the second war of Chechnya was very important pillar. I think the whole idea about leaving the legacy of the loose Russia, which was characterized, once again, I would like to say, with the financial crisis, with the loose power arrangements inside Russia, and actually a very weak elite cohesion is disappearing because of the domestic consolidation which took place in Russia. Of course, Chechen War was the first demonstration and illustration that Russia was going to be very assertive. And I think that was the clear signs of this started from the outset of the Putin's ascension, which was actually, and Chechen War was used as one of the image builders for Putin. But of course, then we're seeing some of the policy pillars that Russia has actually put in place. And here I have to talk about the passportization policy, which is actually, I don't agree with my friend here that the Russian passports are not that big of a problem and that it can actually be trumping the so-called confidence building with this with the issue of passports. I mean, I think that, you know, this has a rudimentary importance for the way West will be countering the Russia's future moves, and I'll try to explain why. In 2002, when these amendments were introduced to the law on Russian citizenship, they were talking about Russian citizenship being given to people who are descendants, who have lived in the Soviet Union and who are stateless. So they were basically trying to target those people who were mostly in the so-called the conflict zone. So it was, of course, Georgia, definitely Transnistria, and few other areas. And many people don't talk about some of the other problems. For example, in Samtskhe-Javakheti, we actually have the same problem. And many people have started to talk about the problems now. Actually, most of the people in Samtskhe-Javakheti already have Russian passports. And that's the big problem. I mean, I'm not talking that it all started now. Actually, it has started in 2002, and even now, when we are looking at Transnistria, there are approximately 150,000 people who hold Russian passports, and that's almost a third of the population there. So. But the very idea which was attached to the Russian citizenship was very different from what they have introduced now. Actually, on April 4th, they introduced new amendments to the law, which are just something that we all should be closely looking at, because now they are introducing a whole different concept. They're expanding the concept of whom the civic, let's say the civic understanding of the Russian citizen can expand. What I mean here, they're talking about all the people who have lived themselves or are direct descendants of people who have lived on the post-Soviet space of USSR plus Russian Empire, which actually goes beyond the present USSR, former USSR, let's say the scope or the area. But apart from this, they actually introduce a new, very interesting element into the simplified measures that they're going to be introducing for granting the citizenship, which is Russian speakers. So Russian speakers, together with their residents in the territories that these people have been living on, will be considered to be a prerequisite for them to take up the Russian citizenship. Well, I would like to jump later to the Eurasianism, which is going to be very much fitting into this whole concept, but the expanded Russian citizenship concept is a very interesting one, because it actually creates a whole different dynamic. There is another very interesting development within these new amendments to the law, which says that once the person receives the Russian passports or Russian citizenship, they have to relinquish their own citizenship, or the citizenship of the host country that they are belonging to at the moment. Well, so this is not anymore about the conflict regions, which was the kind of the thinking during early 2000s, because they needed a casus belli, basically, for intervention. So now it's more about a long-term project, because they're thinking about creating a common space. I'm not saying, and I have my opinion if it's going to be effective, if it's going to work or not, but still that's the thinking in Moscow. So there is the clear evolution of the Russian thinking about how they have to be treating the policy towards the regions, but also towards the countries. And actually, I mean, just to give you this evolution, how I see it, the term "new abroad," which was many think that it was created by during the Putin times, was not the case. I mean, actually, during Yeltsin's times. I mean, Yeltsin was the one who coined the term "new abroad" in his speech. Later, it was Medvedev who actually made it very clear that there is this sense of the sphere of or the regions of special or privileged interests, and soon after that, the first milestone, which was very much kind of giving you a clearer sense of what Russia might be aiming at, was this declaration from Putin about having Eurasian Union by 2015. Well, I mean, we have a very clear distillation of the of a very clear sense of how they look at the development of the policy. Of course, we also have to talk about the self-determination, and the whole idea of self-determination being the biggest, I call it a Damoclean sword of for every other country that we're going to be talking about here, but also beyond that, because when we talk about, for example, the Russian citizenship, that will definitely going to be used as one of the tools for self-determination, not only the Russian citizenship, of course. I mean, we have to look at the percentages of the population in all the former Soviet states with Russian, ethnic Russian representation. And many people think that, you know, yes, Ukraine was too big, in Ukraine the Russian element was too big, but that's such a huge problem. But if we look at the facts, no, actually there are even starker problems that I can observe. For example, in Ukraine, the percentage of Russians is approximately 17%. 17, yeah. I mean, there are different estimates how they self-identify, but still. If you look, for example, in Latvia, it's 27%. If you look in Estonia, it's about 25%. If we look in Kazakhstan, it's 27%. In Belarus, it's 8.5. Here we have 5 point. But what the argument I'm making is that there is a bigger problem that people think just because Ukraine was so divided and there was not a kind of a prerequisite for anything like this to happen in other areas, the effects are actually not observed. So the irredentism, which is going to be on the rise, will be highly challenging, I think, as a trend for many of the countries, and the way the Russians are going to be pursuing it is going to be more aggressive and more assertive. The self-determination problem, I think that the biggest problem stems from the fact of its vagueness and ambiguity. I think that the biggest problem is that the West hasn't come up with any standard definition of how the modus operandi should be put in place. There is no single standard. Of course, I'm truistically kind of letting you know what are the problems. But of course, Russia is using this. I mean, when I was analyzing every single time there was a self-determination claim by any of the new entrants of like Crimea, for example, they're always referring to Kosovo precedent. Every single time they're referring to it, let it be the Crimea Council, which actually announced the referendum, the later petition which was sent to Duma. You know, you always had the Kosovo precedent. Medvedev, during its recognition of our territories as independent, there was a clear sign, and there as well. You know, they're talking about this precedent. So this the 2006 precedent will be haunting many of the countries, I guess, and that problem I don't see. Like I see that hanging on us as a Damoclean sword. Of course, we have to talk also about the constitutional law of Russia, about the integration of new entities. And I think that the amendments which were introduced are once again kind of a clear sign that they're going to be easing this direction as well. I'm not saying that yes, those things are inevitable, but what I'm saying is that when we're trying to assess the threat is actually is becoming more and more evident, because Russia is preparing all the infrastructure it will need for achieving its goals. So they're putting in place the legislative infrastructure. They're putting in place the military infrastructure. And I'll talk about the power component or the hard power component. But that still kind of continues to be the big problem, and will continue to be a big problem. Though when we talk about the self-determination, I see a huge discrepancy between the short-term goals that Russia will have when it comes to promoting the self-determination among the other countries, but not seeing that being as part of their own problem in the long term. And I think I simply don't see that being the very cohesive policy, even though it has a clear sign that Russia sees as being the one. And of course, if we look at the nationalism paradigm, which has been very much also supported by Kremlin, I come to be very I don't know, like split between who makes these decisions? Because if you have the very idea of greater Russia, where we have this irredentism being kind of Russia-centric, and then you have self-determination there being played, I don't see how they're going to be aligning these two in the long term. In the short term, yes, more or less that can be understood. Just going back to the hard power element, I think that the conflict zones will be used more and more as a hard power element in the progression and in the projection of Russian power. This has been the case, of course, in Abkhazia and South Tskhinvali region. For quite some time, I've been observing the addition of offensive weaponry in the regions. Definitely, it's far more than necessary for catering any threat coming from Georgia. That's why they have always been. That's what they have been always talking about, because there is a direct threat from Georgia. So that will be the biggest problem. But of course, there is a different calculation there. It's going to be more about the future moves that might be undertaken. The other problem, of course, is the serious resource mismatch when it comes to the military component. Russians definitely know that there is no other power present in the former Soviet space. The power component is going to be increasing. They definitely have this thinking Central Asia, where they basically the last American farpost when it comes to the bases or the presence there was is gone. So Russia is actually increasing its preponderance when it comes to the military presence, and that projection will be increasing. And actually, there is a new development. Russia is thinking about increasing the power projection capacity beyond the Soviet, former Soviet space. They have new, potentially new deal with Argentina recently about having a new military base there. So that actually changes the whole military doctrine of Russia for, as such, because it's going to be expansionist. And this is going to be continuing. That's the trend I see there. Of course, we have to talk about the satellite regimes, or you can, there are different terms we can call the local elites in the occupied territories or in different conflict zones, but I call them either proxies or installed leaders, etc. But these entities are not sustainable when it comes to them being independently self-sustainable. If you look at the way Russia is funding these entities, yeah, I mean, it's depending on various estimates, it's from 90 to 98%. So and we talk here about the direct budgetary transfer coming from Russia. We have approximately 70% of sources from Russia going to Abkhazia, and I'm not even talking about such things as social benefits. Russia funds the huge proportion of the different kinds of allowances. Of course, pensions are one of them, and this dependency is going to be increasing. And of course, they also have special support schemes for the military. You have to add that to the kind of the whole assistance package that they are giving to the local regimes. And that's going to be continuing. Actually, in Transnistria, you have a bit of a different arrangement, because they also support them through the energy, which has been a big part of the dependence of Transnistria on Russia. But I mean, for example, in Tskhinvali region, we have the same thing. I mean, the energy plays a role there, but just a food for thought. But now I'm coming to where we stand today and what to expect. Well, there is a talk about the future of the region, and we talk about the two opposing projects. One is the Eurasian Union, and then there is the European Union approximation scheme, as I call it, the scheme which has been accelerated due to the events which took place in Ukraine. Well, with all due respect to the very benevolent and I would say extremely timely measures or desires or ambitions of the Western countries to approximate our Georgia, let it be Moldova or Ukraine, I think that it would still be not enough of a step, because in the end what is missing is the security component. Because after signature of AA in June, nothing really changes, because this process will be dragging. But if you look at the tangible benefits, there aren't going to be a lot of tangible benefits for shielding Georgia or Moldova or any other country from the very tangible threats that we're going to be facing. So, I mean, that's definitely a big weakness, because if that's not catered, I don't see that being very, very, let's say, effective. The other problem that we see from Tbilisi, but not only from Tbilisi, is that there is a huge mental cleavage between the new members of NATO, new members of EU, and the rest. And this is so stark that people, the ones who are actually supporting the pro-Western sentiments in Georgia, where I mean, opinion-forming elites, are very much. Everyone is talking about this. So just giving you a sense that this is much something that we actually see as being one of the biggest revelations, and it's actually increasing this gap. The way it's actually seen. The other lesson that we have to learn from Crimea is that there is going to be a huge, I mean, we are all going back to basics, which means that it's also always going to be now about people being more reliant on realpolitik methods. You know, the one thing that I can think is that people will start to, I mean, a lot of corporations in the military-industrial complex will be happy, because people will start talking about actually more about going back to basics, and the people will be more prone to be going that way. Well, the other lesson that I see and that we can equate from the Crimea is that what's going to be the next? Because it was 2008, it was Georgia, there was the reset with Russia, then there was Syria. After Syria, there is Crimea, and I think this succession really creates a very logical trend. So what's next? And I think that we all have to be talking about this as well. I mean, what we think is going to be the next move, because when I look at the division among the Western countries, I don't see that there is going to be a one voice which is going to be countering the trend. Because all up until now, there is still no decision in EU on how to proceed with the sanctions. And even though I think that the US has been taking the lead on the sanctions part, I think it's not going to be enough without the one voice around it. And that's actually very much seen in small parts of the world, like Tbilisi or let it be elsewhere. And that actually creates ripples, the emotional ripples in our region. The other thing is that Putin is going to be moving forward because he always likes to demonstrate his strength. He punished Georgia in 2008. He's punishing Ukraine for what has been done to overthrow the or the government that he was more likely having, and he was going to be going all the way. He will show that he's going to be punishing them. Well, if you look at this trajectory after the signature of AA, what is going to be happening with this symbolics that Putin likes to play with? Well, is it going to be about Transnistria, or is it going to be more about Georgia again, with new problems? And I can talk about the scenarios that I can foresee what the problems can be in Georgia. But again, he's going to be trying to show that he's stronger than others, and others should be responding to him. The other lesson that I drew from what is happening is that Putin leads and everyone else reacts, and he likes this. He usually likes to wait as well, because he definitely has this judo mentality. He likes to use your force against you, and he can wait. That's how he was waiting for 2006. He was preparing. The active phase of Russian assertiveness actually started to be very much starkly different from 2006 onwards. Before that, he was preparing the ground, as I was saying. I mean, preparing infrastructure with the citizenship law, with tightening the grip in the occupied territories, with increasing the military platform in all of these regions. So he's leading now, and he sees that others are reacting. Well, that's going to be something that we're going to be looking at in the times to come. Well, U.S. retreat, I mean, I've heard about this phrase, and that's definitely felt. And I have to be saying that the region definitely sees that being the case. Unfortunately, this is not only the feeling of Georgians, that's the feeling of Eastern Europeans. And definitely that's, no one knows that better than Russians. And of course, that preponderance is felt, and it will have repercussions. The other question is that if there is an understanding and if there is the Cold War kind of picture being depicted, and everyone understands that there are two camps, which I'm very skeptical about, because I see the one camp, but I don't see the other camp yet, and I'm pretty sure that the West, the world, should be rethought, and it has to be recoined, because we don't have the free world anymore, the same way it was understood before. Where the Iron Curtain is going to be hanging? Is it going to be hanging over us and taking us away from the free world, or for any short or medium-term perspective of being part of this, or it's going to be somewhere at the already delineated borders? Well, we want to ask this question, and actually a lot of people are starting to ask this question, and that's going to be another question. The other thing we actually drew as a lesson is that markets react more effectively than governments. It's just amazing. In 2008, the biggest let's say, stick to Russia's actions was the the trend of decreasing confidence into Russian markets. We have observed a similar thing when it comes to the so-called Black Monday in this case. So it is very ironic, but markets are more sensitive to what has been done. But in the short term, in the long term, it's still about the governments, and that's the whole logic. Because the moment the sanctions were announced to be very weak, the markets have started to go up. So once again. My claim is that my logic is that it's still about the governments. It's still about the governments to lead. If the governments don't lead, the markets will stop at certain point to punish the ones who actually erode the trust. And the bigger question is the question of the sovereignty, because if we look at the Russian trajectory of how they want to be going forward, there are a few developments that I see. The first one is that they really create this greater Russia space where you have Russian citizens, and there is no clear borders, and everything is kind of erased. Or there is the concept of limited sovereignty. This was practiced during the Soviet times. It was known as having a de facto veto on anything when it comes to the foreign policy of the country, plus being in control of major assets on the ground. That's how the Eastern Bloc countries were actually managed for quite some time during the Soviet times. So the question is, how are we going to be, or what we're going to be seeing as being the Russia's modus operandi when it comes to the countries of the region? Well, I think I have many other things to talk about. I think I've talked too much, so I'll stop there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So now we have quite a number of issues.
Thank you very much for your wonderful presentations. It gave me a train of thought, at least, and I just came from Zagreb last night, and I'm starting to connect several dots, and I wanted to share my comment and ask a question at the same time with you, to both experts. And I was talking to the experts in the Balkans, and they've been talking about the experiences that what they had in the 90s. It seems to me right now that we are experiencing exactly, we as, for example, the states that have the so-called frozen conflicts, like Guam states, for example, experiencing the same pattern of the geopolitical changes that haunted Balkans in the 90s. It all ended for Balkans being under the different security umbrella, and we all know how that play out, and it seems that the battlefield is shifting to our countries, and the different interests clash, and we are in a different position in terms of that the influence, just as you mentioned, of the United States and the Western countries is not that strong, and the Russia is not that weak as it was after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So what do you think would be the future scenarios, and what would be the role of us as the battlefield, and the role of the players from both sides in the future? Who has the main responsibility to amend the situation here? Thank you.
I think that there was there is an inverse relationship. It used to be West disengaged, West engaged in Balkans more, and Russia disengaged because of its weakness. Now we have the other way around it in our region, which is West is mostly disengaged and Russia is mostly engaged. So that creates the pattern where I can talk about kind of the tendency, how I see things going forward. If things not change, of course, I'm not saying that that's definitely the scenario which is going to be followed up, but I do see that inversive trend. Well, what should we do? I definitely think that there are limits that the small countries can do, because we just cannot create strides, and that's the big problem, because there is a caveat and there is a conditionality attached to what the small countries can do. So the only thing I foresee as being that the small countries, the countries of the region, try to shore up support for the vision that they have. And I hope that that's the vision of preserving sovereignty and not letting the other players decide our fate. And of course, the work that we have to be conducting is of course, very much political and diplomatic. But apart from this, of course, I do see the very clear trends that are important to uphold. Like I'll be talking about Georgia, what is important for us. In Georgia, every time we do polling of the population about our Euro-Atlantic aspirations, we have very high numbers. We have approximately 80, low 80s, high 70s supporting this trend. So for Georgia, I would see that being something that we have to be working on, forming an opinion which will be helping to uphold these things. I think it's extremely important. Why? Because in recent weeks and recent months, I've seen and we have been observing the activation of Russian activities providing the alternative narrative. Of course, this is not really a mainstream yet, but what I see is that there is the activation of the turf in Georgia. So there are a few things that I'll be putting into perspective, the long term and the short term. In the long term, I think there is an understanding, and I think that's an unfortunate understanding, that the West might be on a decline. And the narrative about that has been very much cultivated in our region. So if we get that, I mean, if we fix that as a kind of one of the scenarios, then of course the void which will be created is definitely going to be filled by some powers, the regional powers. We definitely don't see Turkey right now putting up the muscle to argue for alternative scenario. If that void is created, and if we see there is much alienation on behalf of Turkey vis-a-vis EU vis-a-vis Turkey, I see that cleavage actually increasing. And if that happens, our countries will find itself in an isolated isle. And once again, when we talk about the long-term trends, we have to take all of that into account. And unfortunate reality is that not many people beyond the region or this narrow circle of pundits understand the real repercussions.
Thank you. Vytis?
Well, first of all, of course, the main thing is sticking to the principles, right? Non-recognition, that's important. Then the second point would be the damage control. So we need to think about our partners in the Eastern Partnership region and work with the authorities that these provocations, incidents do not overspill the frozen conflicts, these regions. The third thing is to step in when it comes to like we were talking, that it's only the reaction. We need to be more assertive here. Like West needs to challenge and play hard here, especially when we talk about the principle of self-determination. I haven't heard really none of the politicians raising the issue of the Tatarstan. 22 years ago, there was a referendum which was like in Tatarstan, and Kremlin ignored that. Nobody's talking about that, and there are many regions which potentially could be a threat to Russia itself if it declares that self-determination is a principle. But we need to be really play hard here. So the other thing is understanding that for Russian Federation, sustaining these regions is quite an expensive business. Of course, in case of Ossetia, I would argue that the money is disappearing there. Like when we look per capita, so we understand that it's almost the laundering mechanism for the money, right? But having Crimea, it also affects the Russian budget, and I don't think that Kremlin has a lot of luxury here. With the markets reacting faster, I think that in some cases these conflicts are even instigated just to hide some of the problems, especially addressing the local populations here. So, but the most importantly, I think that, as I have said earlier, working with the civil societies, like even in the conflict regions, I mean, we need to communicate with them. Like, otherwise, they are brainwashed. They actually, some of them even don't understand the consequences, what it is to be in the Russian Federation as such, right? And I think that it's also important to talk to the Russian population, because like the support which is growing to Putin, it's incredible, but we understand why it's happening so. And there's a problem that I guess we are not talking, we don't have good communication channels with the Russian civil society. We stick to the very same opposition as if they are the players, and they are not. And we know why, again. So we need to have channels of communication. And therefore, like, I was coming back to the point which was raised, as if I'm the supporter of the passportization, God forbid. I mean, really, I think that it's a huge, huge problem. But I'm challenging the EU policy here regarding the recognition of the Russian passports. I mean, if I want to bring the Abkhazians to Europe, it's difficult. Though I know that the same Abkhazians are going on the touristic basis to Czech Republic, to Spain, and then I would question the efficiency of such non-recognition policy. I mean, but passportization is a huge threat, especially when we have these conversations regarding the visa-free regime with Russia. I mean, that's insane. That would kill all the Eastern Partnership Initiative if it is not dead yet, right? So, because that would be a signal that all these people with the Russian passports, the easiest way for them to Brussels would be going through Moscow, and that would be so another thing which we might think is about easing the visa process for Ukrainians, Armenians, Azeris, Moldovans, etc., etc. The faster we go with that, the better chances we have with the people-to-people contacts. And then in the long term, I mean, it wouldn't produce immediate results, but that's the way we should be patient here, and we should work on this.
Thank you. Vladimir.
To Irakli's question about where the new Iron Curtain would run. Recently, the Russian officials are taking the position publicly that there will be a new dividing line that would run not along the country's borders, but inside those countries that are oriented themselves to the West. In other words, enforced partition as punishment for Western-oriented countries, which we have seen de facto already in Moldova, officially declared in Georgia, de facto in Azerbaijan, and officially declared in the case of Crimea.
Thank you. Actually, I wanted to come in on Irakli's point. He was giving an overview of these preparatory kind of actions that Putin did during his first half of the second presidency, and as which we can now see as being not just sort of random actions, but preparation for kind of revanchist expansion. You are talking about the sort of passport and citizenship policy and military upgrade and so on and so forth. And I would like to put in as a sort of, possibly as a suggestion or a question that the fairly sort of extensive buying into European sort of industries, which was happening in the first decade of the millennium, as well as promotion of sort of shared projects with major European companies, was a way of ensuring kind of economic hinterground for such actions, because you referred yourself to this kind of resilience of the stock markets towards towards Russian aggression. As you say, there would be a sort of immediate drop, but in the absence of sustained sanctions or sort of more clearly pronounced attitudes of the governments of the West, the stock markets would sort of spring back fairly rapidly. And one of the reasons is the interconnectedness into which Russia was heavily investing in sort of making, in a sense, European economy too interdependent with the sort of fortunes of Russian economy, and hence making any prolonged kind of withdrawal of the markets fairly impossible. What's your take on that?
I think that the argument is very much the argument which stands. Actually, Russian policy of interconnecting the world based on the economic and financial interests has been very much used as a tool, like energy. Because there is a very interesting book which is the Comrade J. I don't know if many have read this book, but that's actually the book where the former intelligence officer of Russia who defects to the United States explains the very idea of how Russia's thinking about creating this interconnectedness is actually becoming the part of the Russian policy. Basically, what he talks about is that the new opportunities that Russia gives to the Western companies or Western businesses creates a soil for actually projecting the interests that Russia would otherwise will be not able to project. So definitely, I mean, as I see the evolution of the arguments in support of not punishing Russia, I do see that there is a clear lobby in Brussels, for example, which is the lobby right now very much orchestrated by the EU, the head of the EU Chamber of Commerce in Russia. I mean, he basically went there in Brussels and was arguing about less of sanctions for the actions that actually Russia took against Ukraine. I mean, so you see a clear sign. But of course, that's not the only repercussion and the only ripple. We also have to talk about the so-called multipolar world that Putin has been advocating as its foreign policy doctrine for one of the parts of his foreign policy doctrine, which very much actually helps to achieve this. And if we look at the way it has played out, let it be the energy-wise, and Vlad can talk more in depth about it, but that's exactly what has been happening, because the energy interest that Russia has been lobbying in most of the European countries has been exactly the divide part of this monolith that one can understand as being counter to Russia's interests. So I do see that Russia's interests are projected by the economic and financial means, and it has been part of their foreign policy projection weaponry or arsenal.
But while energy policy is in a sense a very sort of direct way of projecting power, it's a sort of pushing energy squeeze, energy sort of blackmail, but I see a different strategy of kind of purchasing sufficient number of strategic industries in the West, which would make any sanctions or by the markets themselves sort of fairly unfeasible in the long run. Please, James.
Right, so thank you. Interesting discussion so far. But if I were to boil it down and to summarize it, then the discussion seems to me to be basically divided into two parts. Russia, a spoiler, inferiority complex, trying to rebuild an empire, succeeding in parts, but overall doomed to failure. On the one side, and the West on the other side, weak, insufficiently engaged, poor financially, but generally spineless. And believe me, I do not at all disagree with that. That's my own summary, obviously. But that seems to be that seems to be roughly to what I would boil down the discussion to so far. But there is another argument. It's not my argument, but it's a powerful argument, not an intellectually powerful argument, but an expediently or operationally powerful argument, which is that Russia. It'll be outlined tomorrow, actually. I shouldn't really say who, because it's a bit unfair, but I know that one of the speakers tomorrow takes this view. It's not my view, but this argument is that Russia is the dominant player in the region, like it or not. The West can do nothing about it, like it or not. The Eastern Partnership was a failure. It was meant to be a failure. It was a token. It was a token piece of. It was a token offering to these 6 countries, and that we ultimately need to come to an accommodation with Russia, which is not unlike, say, the Finland accommodation and neutrality, whereby these countries will be broadly independent, but certainly not as far as their geopolitical orientation is concerned, because we cannot do anything about it. And because of that, we have to get real and be realistic, and ultimately they'll have to be divided. I know that is absolutely blasphemy in this room, and it is to me as well, by the way, because believe me, nothing outrages me more. But it is certainly a very powerful argument to those people who just want this problem to go away. And believe me, there are so many people in the West who want this problem to go away. And they would love to come to a nice deal with Russia and to get on to and to get back to doing business with usual, as the head of BP said in his annual general meeting in London just yesterday. So I suppose my point is I think we're all going to agree, or most of us are going to agree here, except perhaps this one speaker tomorrow, which I'll be very interested to hear him. And I want to know how do we, and I have my own ideas on this, but I won't go into them now, but how are we going to get out of this paradigm whereby we combat the weakness of the West, the greater determination of Russia, when we're stuck in this rut, if you like, and we're unable and unwilling to really do anything about it, because doing something about it would mean a radical change to geopolitics and politicians, unlike markets. And I do agree with you very directly, because I think that markets are a little bit stronger, and markets could well be an answer here. But politicians just aren't willing to do this. And that doesn't mean to say Russia's going to win, because, as I say, Russia is unable to win because it's turning back. It's the wrong side of history, that kind of stuff. It's pushing against the tide in the King Canute-like fashion. But it does mean that we're not going to win either. It's certainly not in the near term. Somebody said earlier that these states are unsustainable. The separatist states are unsustainable. That may be true, but it takes an awfully long time for them not to be sustainable. Because Russia doesn't want them to flourish. It's not like Russia wants South Ossetia or Crimea to be a perfect example of statehood. It just wants it to rumble on poorly, pathetically, really, and they can do that for a long, long time. So it's all very well to say, oh yeah, well, Crimea can't survive on its own, South Ossetia can't survive on its own. Well, it can, just really badly. So ultimately, I'm just wondering how we get out of this stagnation. That's the word, rut, because I'm in agreement with everybody here. I think that Russia is more determined, even if the West is stronger. But the West isn't willing to use that strength. And if we're not willing to use that strength, and it seems that we're not, where do we go?
Thank you. Yes.
My question is not long, and it's mostly geared at Irakli. I was wondering whether the Turkey, Georgia, Azerbaijan trilateral integration is a degree of an antidote to some of the problems for the region, in that TANAP, the railway that I still don't understand why it's not finished, but and other, this effort to create a political component to this integration as well. Do you see this as alleviating some of these potential threats, creating a Western stakeholder, increasing the Western stakeholder element in the region? Is this something that should be focused on more intently, developed, given more vision, given more importance? And if so, is it also perceived from Moscow as a threat, or is this something irrelevant from Moscow's perspective because it's not going to lead anywhere anyway? Yeah, and you know, in addition, do you think one can or should increase the political strategic vision as opposed to keeping it as an infrastructure, economic type process, which I see it as for the most part now? I don't see the three countries really aligning strategically, except for to the extent that those pipelines and railways and everything have a strategic value.
Thank you. So now we have really time for closing remarks by the concluding remarks by the panelists, bearing in mind that coffee is waiting outside, right?
Very briefly, of course, I don't have like there's no silver bullet saying like how we could compete with Russia. But my argument would be, it's not actually about the competition. That's what Kremlin is pushing us for, to be in this zero-sum game. And when we are in the zero-sum game and we are mostly talking about geopolitics, then we are doomed to lose. Europe is doomed to lose, I think, because we don't have enough resources, we don't have the political will. But I think that Europe was always better playing in this soft power, maybe, approach, if you will, and in this attitude, the win-win perspective, and of course and Kremlin doesn't know how to play the game win-win. But I think the civil society could play that game, and therefore, we need to outreach the population, the people there. And I would give you just one tiny example here. In my hometown here, like in Vilnius, in Lithuania, we are not even capable to outreach normally to the Russian and Polish-speaking population. We are losing them here in our home court to the Russian media. So, if we are losing here, I think that we are just not thinking about it enough. And I think that we should think how to outreach the Russian-speaking population in Ukraine, in Georgia, in Azerbaijan, in Armenia, because otherwise, of course, we are doomed to lose. So having this perspective of the win-win approach, economic approach including, and less geopolitics, more people to people.
Thank you. Irakli?
Just to start from the second question, absolutely. I mean, of course, there is potential, and I guess Georgia, Turkey, Azerbaijan. I mean, we all of us have very much the interests which do converge in many ways. Because I mean, no matter what people will say, of course, that's definitely an alternative to what Russia can offer to the region, and I don't see it otherwise. Well, about the prospects, can it be more political? There were actually attempts throughout this time to have more political triangle or the. There were attempts. There were a few actually declarations of the three foreign ministers, which have been the case for almost 2 years now, almost. And there are attempts, but unfortunately, this desire is not matched by the resources, but also by the willingness. And I have to be talking, and I can analyze all three within that. I mean, let's look at Georgia right now. Georgian government is very much scared of Russia at the moment. I mean, I have to be very clear that they don't want to take up any initiative at the moment which will in any way irritate Russia. We have been on this very passive turn for quite some time, talking about changing the form rather than the substance vis-a-vis Russia, for example. They think that, if we don't talk too much about the Russians, if we don't talk about their problems, the problems will go away or it's going to be postponed. So That's the mindset that Georgians have right now. I mean, the government, you know, which is, let's not get into things that might damage the very fragile state of where Georgia is right now. So that's going to be continuing. Okay, if that's the case, of course, our friends in Baku also think, you know, they have to balance their own cards. And I have to be very clear, and I have to speak my mind, and that's very pragmatic, of course. And neither of us can define the agenda by ourselves. And that's very much the clear sense that all of us, I guess, have. And then comes the biggest player, of course, it's Turkey. Well, is Turkey ready to really see itself being a power which is going to be defining its interests in a different way that it has for the past decades? Well, I'm not really sure that thinking has been part of the foreign policy establishment in Turkey, and we talked a lot about it, and I don't see that being the case for now. But there are too many things that can really be pushing Turkey not to take this role. Of course, this is very much the dependency on the many soft power elements of the cooperation that they have with Russians. I mean, that's very much has been the premise that has been very a huge argument, and I don't see any argument actually in the short term overturning that trend. The other thing is that Turkey doesn't really see itself putting a lot of muscles in the region up until now. They're more concerned about increasing the appeal rather than really showing any potentially Russia countering activities. You know, they clearly don't want to be messing with Russia at the moment. That's the feeling that there is. So if we have these three elements, you know, all these three countries, I don't really see in the short term a political element added to it, even though all of us are interested. That's what I'm saying. But I just see that the prerequisites for that have been absent. I personally think that there is no alternative to that. So in the long run, that can be one of the game changers. But but it's not only going to be about Turkey as well. You know, it has to be some others as well. I mean, if we look at how the history has been evolving, if we look at all the energy projects, it has always been about a bigger player than all of us. So it was U.S. during those times, you know, which just lobbied it big time. So what I'm saying is that there are regional powers, there are small countries in the region, and there are the powers who actually can define the geopolitical landscape. TANAP is important, of course, because it
Sure.
I mean, it defines I mean, it kind of enhances the whole thing. But when it comes to the bigger things, you know, I think that there needs to be more effort put in it, and I don't see that effort actually being either willing to be taken by someone or actually the resources for that to be the case. What should happen in order to change the whole logic? You know, I actually know who you are talking about the skeptic, and I've heard that argument for quite some time. You know, there is certain logic in that argument, frankly. You know, and I've talked a lot with people with that arguments. Well, then it's about soul searching inside Europe and the West. That's exactly the question I was putting forward. You know, what the Western countries are about. You know, and I cannot answer that question myself. You know, of course, that's the question which has to be answered by others as well. But of course, that's the realism argument. You know, the Cold War realist argument. You know, which actually is very, which has been taking traction in the United States as well. You know, in certain circles right now, and that's how they're seeing things. But one thing that can change that is actually the big crisis, which will affect them as well. So which will affect the West in a way which hasn't been affecting. So if that doesn't happen, of course, there isn't going to be the same clarity to the goal. And I usually say that these big shocks create a better ground. And of course, we also have to talk about domestic politics in major countries. You know, I mean, definitely there is more populistic stand, you know, on many issues, and the populism has to be fed by certain resources, or let's say by the economics, or by being lavishly spending on some of the things. So if that's the argument, you know, the populism, you know, and there is more populism and less value-based politics in Europe or elsewhere, well, that's going to be very difficult to change that trend, provided that there is no bigger crisis, the shock which actually affects lives, because people have to argue for being more interventionist. And I do see that being the big problem for lots of politicians in the environment where when the local people don't really understand why they have to invest resources in Georgia, in Ukraine. That argument has been missing. You know, no one is trying to explain that to people, their audiences.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Let's thank the Center for Strategic Studies, and who is going to talk on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict from international law and geopolitical perspectives. So, Dr. Makyil Aliyev, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure and a great honor to be here, and I want to thank the organizers from both sides for this great opportunity, first of all. And as we have time delays and consuming problems, without further ado, I want you to take a look at the presentation that we'll be making today. As it's evident from the name, I'll be talking about the 2 points in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict: it's a failure of international law and the stagnation of geopolitics. Why these 2 points? Because I think the combination of the two is what led to the situation that we have right now, and this probably unfairly calls in the frozen conflict, but at least it's very true to the geopolitics that froze it at this same moment. It would be true to call the geopolitical situation a little bit frozen here. But first of all, let me bring us to the same grounds of what the conflict is, and very short introduction of what the conflict is. It's one of the gravest conflicts in the modern history of mankind, actually. It still poses a considerable threat to international peace and security, as well as to welfare of the states in the region of South Caucasus. It began in 1988 when the Armenian population of Nagorno-Karabakh, with the support of the Armenian then Soviet Socialist Republic, demanding the secession of the territory from then Azerbaijan Soviet Socialist Republic, and its transfer to the territory of Armenia. After the dissolution in 1991 of the Soviet Union, the conflict went into full-scale war between two newly independent states. The states actually by themselves were recognized in the territorial borders that they retained in time of the Soviet Union, uti possidetis juris, hence the recognition of all actual post-Soviet states in the borders that we have right now, and it's uncontested basically on the international arena. The result of the war was the bloodiest outcome of all the conflicts on the post-Soviet era so far, I'm thinking Ukraine, with more than 25,000 lives lost. And at least only from Azerbaijani side, it left us with 1 million combination of refugees and IDPs, and approximately 20% of our territory is occupied. And we're in a situation of a shaky ceasefire agreement since 1994. That's the background of the conflict. During all this period of time, the international community have numerous times condemned the occupation of Azerbaijani territories and the aggression of Armenia. We have multiple legal instruments that regard this situation. Just as Mr. Guliyev said before, we have 4 UN Security Council resolutions. We have resolutions from European Parliament, Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe. We have Organization of Islamic Cooperation resolution. Even NATO, in its document on the Chicago summit, mentions in its declaration that unresolved conflicts in Nagorno-Karabakh, as well as in Georgia and Moldova, are in the long list of the security challenges that the West is facing. And in that declaration, it singles out the territorial integrity of internationally recognized states, of course, as the guiding principle for the resolution of the conflicts, and actually makes no reference to the people's right to self-determination, which is usually championed by Armenian side. In the conflict, Well, all the aforementioned shows that there is a clear recognition of the occupation from the international legal point of view, but the situation on the ground is not really reflective of the legal realities. It has to be pointed out that South Caucasus is geopolitically a very complicated region, and that the failure of international law is indirectly linked with the stagnation of geopolitics. Azerbaijan and Armenia are conflicting parties that constitute 2/3 of the South Caucasus. And here we have the regional interests of such players as Russia, Iran, and Turkey, and those are intertwined with within the very, very tight geopolitical knot with the outside interests of such as international players as United States, European Union, and even Israel. All that creates a very complicated situation of competing interests that supports the current status quo in Nagorno-Karabakh, as none of the interested parties, except from Azerbaijan, of course, wants to try and loosen the geopolitical knot, because that means a lot of implications, that means a lot of changes, and nobody really wants a lot of changes at the same time. Well, all the attempts of resolution have been failing to date, and the geopolitical stagnation is merged with obvious failure of international law. That's what I want to talk about in this presentation. So, that's the implications of the conflict. The result of Armenian aggression. We can see the former Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast, autonomous region, surrounding territories, 7 regions that occupied, a lot of facts, refugees, territories lost, damage to Azerbaijan, failure of international law. It's very interesting what was going on right now from the 90s. The doctrine of international law and international relations is hearing more and more voices that ask, why is international law failing in the situation of armed conflicts? We've seen this kind of situations in Libya and Syria, now even in Ukraine. It was on the agenda of International Law Commission for some time now. Failure of implementation in forms of international law in Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is usually avoided for some reason in the doctrine, but it's more than 20 years old by now, and happened far back before Libya, Syria, or Ukraine. Well, the questions of effective forms of international law are often deadlocked in the international community. We have seen that many, many times with the Security Council decisions and how they are not implemented. Same goes to the 4 resolutions that we have. They demand unconditional and complete withdrawal of the Armenian armed forces from our occupied territories, not implemented to the date. UN Charter Article 25 states that these resolutions are obligatory for enforcement and implementation for all of the UN member states, including Armenia, and Armenia ignored those resolutions until today. So the Security Council is not without tools for implementation. Under Article 41 and under Article 42, it can apply measures starting from economic and ending with the use of force if it deems it necessary to ensure the implementation of its resolutions. That has never been done, unfortunately. No one is making Armenia to comply with the resolutions of Security Council until today. This is actually a very interesting point, because as the UN Security Council is not acting on the situation, that gives the Azerbaijan the ability to retain its right to this inherent self-defense. Again, this is all in UN Charter, Article 51. We still have a possibility to return our territories through the use of force in the use of rights of self-defense. A lot of times we are criticized for what's called military rhetoric. It's not a military rhetoric. It's actually United Nations Charter rhetoric. You have inherent rights to self-defense. UN Security Council is not acting. You still retain the right to amend the situation by your own means. Apart from that, we have experienced the transfer of the situation from the Security Council that was deadlocked, that was not working, into the regional organizations that actually lacks the tools to do that, to the OSCE, which created the Minsk group, reformatted it several times during the peace process, but as it was already mentioned again, the OSCE lacks the instruments to resolve the conflicts in the way of a moderator it doesn't have instruments of implementation. Again, we're going further and further deep into the how step by step the law is failing. If we start from the next issue, it would be probably the contest of principle of territorial integrity and right of people to self-determination. This is a very interesting situation where there was a distortion in understanding of international law for all these years, and I would personally, as an international lawyer, would blame the doctrine in international relations and media for actually distorting the vision of these principles. I hear a lot of things said about both principles, and it really surprises me that it's not really outspoken that there can be a collision or misunderstanding of a principle of international law. It was already, 60 years ago, already written down, already discussed, and already described what it actually means. A lot of time I hear that the right of people to self-determination, right of the peoples to self-determination, is a principle that is not clear. It can have double meanings, several meanings. You can comment on it the way you want. It's not true. For example, if we go to the roots, and in 1945 at the World War II, this principle was included and coined specifically, specifically to deal with the colonialism and the imperialism after the World War II. Where is that written? United Nations Charter does not provide the answers to that question, but the Declaration of the Principles of International, that a lot of people seem to forget, actually says that. It says that this principle means that in order to liberate the people in the colonialism and imperialism, they have a right to determine their fate freely, in a political way, etc., etc., etc. The whole principle of external self-determinations in means of having your own territory and your own political structures was tailored specifically for the colonized nations. Right now, after arguably by the end of the 70s, this process was all over 3 times in a row. Nowadays, and that was really reflected in the Helsinki Final Act that is right now one of the main documents of OSCE, this principle is used in a narrow sense with respect of territorial integrity. It is right in the Helsinki Final Acts that it says that, for example, I want to even quote that. I can find the quote now. But what it actually says is that this right of self-determination of the peoples will be used with respect of the other principles of international law and specifically territorial integrity. That means that the narrow understanding of the principle of self-determination of the peoples, after that point in time, have to be considered as internal. It means that it would serve the cases where the need of a protection of the minorities, can be, where it can be applied to the protection of the minorities. It means that given minorities cultural rights, religious rights, language rights, within the territorial integrity of the state in question. Later on, this principle in the 90s was very, very misunderstood as to having implications of it as an external self-determination. It is totally wrong. This part of the principle is dead and long in the history. When it comes to applying it to Nagorno-Karabakh Armenians, that's even more outrageous because they are not people in the understanding of UN Charter. They are people that, if we think about them as an Armenian people, then they already have exercised the right to self-determination. They have a Republic of Armenia, and you can exercise that right only once. If we're taking them in the understanding of the territory where they live, where they're a national minority then in the territory of Azerbaijan Republic. And of course, they will never be a colonial people, especially overseas. That's a misunderstanding of the right of peoples to self-determination. Later, there was another disturbance in the understanding of international law when we got a discourse that Nagorno-Karabakh, so-called Nagorno-Karabakh Republic, is a de facto state. I hear that many times, and again, I cannot agree with that. Again, for the purpose of international law, we have the universally recognized criteria already, at least in the doctrine of international law, where we have a Montevideo Convention of 1933 providing the criteria for statehood. Permanent population, defined territory, government, capacity to enter into relations with other states. All that cannot be applied to the entity, separatist entity that was there. It doesn't have a permanent population. Well, how could it have it when we have had ethnic cleansings and the Azerbaijani community of Nagorno-Karabakh is not present in the territories that are now on occupation? It's already a mismatch. They don't have clear territories. The line of contact between two armed forces cannot be considered a stable border to define the territory. Without territory, again, the permanent population argument is not applicable. Government, own government is a joke because it's controlled out of the Republic of Armenia. It's a marionette kind of setup. Everybody knows where the decisions are taken, where the finances are coming from, and how the structure works. It's basically guided as one of the regions of the Republic of Armenia. And of course, because no one recognized it, including Armenia itself, it doesn't have the capabilities of interacting with other governments. These kind of things and this kind of discourses in international law created the situation where Azerbaijan and Armenia were, in the peace process, put on the one term of the scales, on the one level of the scales, where we are victim of aggression, have to speak on the same terms with the Republic of Armenia. And such disrespect to international law really leads to any kind of progress in the peace process. Geopolitical stagnation. What do we have in the region of South Caucasus? First of all, Azerbaijan and Armenia were not able to establish normal international relations, and common communications were hampered in the region. The logistical options were limited in the region. The conflict situation led to the increase in instability. It brought a lot of difficulties to all the regional energy and infrastructural projects. We cannot avoid the Russian factor, as it was also determining its inability to accept the full sovereignty of the states in South Caucasus, and constant attempts, and in case of Armenia, it was successful to gain full control of the policies of these states. It has brought it into the situation where there is no possibility to be found to apply pressure to both sides of the conflict to resolve it. Russia was not able to maintain military presence in was able to maintain some military presence in South Caucasus, and it leaned toward in that area towards cooperation with Armenia for obvious political reasons. And at that end, we see Azerbaijan setting up the energy projects bypassing Russia. It was already, because it was already by that moment mindful of its national security, and otherwise we would fall into the same devilish loophole with Armenia and got influenced by Russia much more. Again, we have a factor of another great regional power, Turkey, that naturally supported Azerbaijan in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and even closed its borders with Armenia in support of that, and that led to the only two players in the region, Azerbaijan and Turkey, applying any kind of pressure to the aggressor state. That's the leverage that we have in restricting Armenia from the communications with the outside world and hampering its ability to join the regional projects. In case of Iran, that have played a relatively smaller role in the conflict opposite to its own rhetoric, it did not support Azerbaijan in the conflict that much and maintains a close cooperation with Armenia on a wide range of areas such as energy, agriculture, military technologies, etc. United States and the European Union have interests that encompass both relations with newly independent states in South Caucasus and energy interests in the Caspian Sea. Well, their presence is also amounting to the complication of the geopolitical knot that we already witnessing without them, when the regional powers with the colliding interests already tied into. That geopolitical knot fell into the constant stagnation that is very, very evident from the peace process that encompassed the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. After the ceasefire in 1994, Lisbon Summit, Lisbon Summit Minsk Group in 1996 already came up with the principles that were recommended for the resolution of the conflict. And they included the territorial integrity of both Azerbaijan and Armenia, self-determination for Nagorno-Karabakh, in form of the highest form of self-rule, I'm guessing that would be autonomy, within the territorial borders of Azerbaijan, and legal status and security guarantees for the population of this region of Nagorno-Karabakh, with mutual obligations to ensure the compliance with all terms of the settlement of the conflict. Unfortunately, that was not acceptable for Armenia. They made that very clear, though all the other participating states in the summit voted in favor of it. Later, two proposals by Minsk Group in 1997 were coined, and they went around the total or partial withdrawal of Armenian forces from the occupied territories and deployment of the peacekeepers in conjunction with the return of IDPs and refugees in two different frameworks. One was that every item on the agenda that I have listed would be negotiated independently, and in the later proposal, it was step by step. So define the order of the steps, withdrawal of troops, return of IDPs, and go step by step. Both of these proposals were rejected by Armenia, and in '98, Minsk Group proposed another interesting idea, creation of a common state with a de facto independence of Nagorno-Karabakh. It actually would be allowed the matters of their own authorities, constitution, state attributes, and even possibility of direct contacts with other states as a matter of foreign relations, and that solution was not acceptable for Azerbaijan because it violated territorial integrity. Later, it has to be pointed out that the peace process went into the phase of a direct contacts between the top government officials, presidents, foreign ministers. A lot of ideas were coined in this period. It went up until 2007, where ideas of exchange of territories with the linking of Nakhichevan of Azerbaijan through Megri corridor and linking Karabakh to Armenia through Lachin corridor with, I'm going to show it like this. If I think that would be more. Yeah, see here the connection to Nagorno-Karabakh through Lachin corridor and the Megri corridor with Nakhichevan for Azerbaijan, while each side would retain its own territorial integrity, both Armenia and Azerbaijan. Again, we've seen the very unconstructive approach of Armenian side, and this kind of ideas remained ideas and didn't go into the solid plan of a resolution or some kind of a document. In 2007, in the Madrid summit of OSCE, the Madrid principles were introduced and actually announced 2 years later after G8 summit in L'Aquila. And they included the return of the territories of Nagorno-Karabakh under Azerbaijani control, interim status of Nagorno-Karabakh providing guarantees for security and self-governance, corridor linking Armenia to Nagorno-Karabakh, future determination of the final legal status of Karabakh through legally binding expression of will, the right of all internally displaced persons and refugees to return to their former places, residence, and international security guarantees that would probably include the peacekeeping operations. These kind of principles are still the recommendations for the peace talks around Nagorno-Karabakh that should lead to the, some kind of a permanent peace treaty that would resolve it. They have been reaffirmed in 2008 in Moscow declarations. And after that, due to, again, the disagreements on these basic principles already, we are still back into the context on the highest level between the president and foreign ministers. And now the situation is just loopholing again and again towards present day, where we don't have any kind of permanent decision on the resolution. So this process is very interesting. It was very reflective of a geopolitical situation at hand that was stable in terms of because it would always put Azerbaijan and Armenia on one scale of level, again due to the failure of international law. It was just all around keeping the status quo, and once the idea on the table, you would have a round of negotiations when Armenians would say it's not applicable to us. Here we start to go again. Once, twice, 3 times. It showed that there was not interest neither from Armenia nor from the regional players to ensure that there would be enough pressure to make Armenia to commit to some kind of a resolution. This geopolitical deadlock and the lack of the will to implement international law in these situations cannot be considered inspiring optimism, of course. The only possible ways that would bring the resolution of the conflict are either considerable geopolitical changes that would bring the change in status quo and rearrange the picture completely, or the implementation of international law itself. The problem with the first way is that the geopolitical changes can have positive and negative effects, ranging from peaceful resolution under common win-win situation arrangements, and there are such a resolution. We, for example, withdraw of armed forces, Azerbaijan regains territorial integrity, makes an autonomy there, invests a lot of money in the region and in Armenia, which is now suffering economically very, very much. Having the regional projects with Armenia and tightens the cooperation in the region, but we already have a great cooperation with Georgia. If we would have the same thing in Armenia, I would argue that the South Caucasus would be unprecedented by the level of integration in the future. That's a win-win arrangement. Or it would end up in the open armed confrontation that would ignite the whole region, probably, because the security challenges there are numerous. Both of such scenarios are game changers, of course. On the other hand, the second way would bring the implementation of international law, but that is heavily dependent on the goodwill of the states that we haven't seen for 20 years. And in this case, that would be a change in the approach of Armenia to the conflict, probably, which would bring the withdrawal of troops and creation of the conditions for peaceful settlement. Because once you have an occupying force, the peaceful settlement seems like a joke. This scenario can be willing or enforced, but judging from the previous experience, for now it seems less than realistic. So with that, I lineated here what are the negative sides and positive sides. And for now, there is only one thing right now left, is hope. Hope that at some point, one of the changes will be there, and that change would be positive and bring the win-win rather than another bloody armed conflict around this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for incisive analysis. And I think we'll continue with the same pattern of having both papers on the same topic, one after the other, and then having time for discussion and questions after the 2 papers. So then I call on Aryeh Gut, who is Israeli political analyst and commentator on TV and radio, and official representative of Justice for Khojaly campaign in Israel. And he'll talk on Nagorno-Karabakh as the first frozen conflict in the territory of the former Soviet Union. So,
first of all, thank you for organizers from Baku and Lithuania concerning Karabakh case. I'm Aryeh Gut from Israel. I'm a representative of Azerbaijan-Israel International Association, our diaspora organization in Israel, and during the year we are very holding so many meetings concerning Karabakh and Khojaly, and in this connection I would like to talk about it concerning Karabakh case. The end of the Cold War and disintegration of the Soviet Union had profound implications on the geopolitical and strategic policies of the South Caucasus, with the emergence of new states, along with the new opportunities and difficulties. The collapse of the Soviet Empire, which provided artificial sense of order and stability, allowed the surfacing of old disagreements, and rivalries that in the several places have escalated into armed confrontation. In the international relations, the frozen conflict is a situation in which active armed conflict has been brought to the end, but no peace treaty or other political framework resolves the conflict to the satisfaction of the combatants. Here we have two questions. Why did these conflicts become frozen, and under what conditions might they resume? With regard to the first, several factors contribute to the immobility of frozen conflicts. Frequently, the military balance between the sides is reasonably stable, such that neither side has capacity to prevail. In political terms, nature of intersocial grievance, often ethnically based, is interactable. The Karabakh frozen conflict is rooted in the policy of occupation of Armenia against Azerbaijan. Armenian separatists from Nagorno-Karabakh adopted a unilateral decision to secede from Azerbaijan in February 1988. In December 1989, the Parliament of Armenia decided to annex Mountains Karabakh, an integral part of Azerbaijan, in a move grossly violating international law and norms of conduct. In the international level, outside powers may see an interest in maintaining frozen status quo. Many analysts take the view, for example, the persistence of conflict situation in the region of South Caucasus has served Russian interest by providing leverage in Russia's relations with sometimes difficult neighbors. Nagorno-Karabakh frozen conflict is likely unknown to most people outside the former Soviet Union. The frozen conflict term applies to the number of the other disputes in post-Soviet space and tends to characterize ethnic or territorial conflicts which coincided with the demise of the Soviet Union. As a result of aggression against the Republic of Azerbaijan, approximately 20% of territory of Azerbaijan was occupied and 20,000 persons were killed, 50,000 persons left wounded, and almost 1,000 settlements were looted and ruined. The number of internally displaced persons from occupied Azerbaijani territories today have reached 1 million people. In a country of 8 million people, this represents the highest per capita number of internally displaced persons in the world. Concerning the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, we would like to underline the geopolitical interests of the countries. While Turkey has been pro-Azerbaijani, supporting Baku politically and diplomatically, Iranian pro-Armenian position prefers a weak Azerbaijani republic on northern flank. Iranian leaders fear that independent, oil-rich and affluent Azerbaijan might negatively influence the well-integrated Azerbaijani minority. I would like to remind you that 35% of Iranian population are Azeris. Today it is fact that Armenia is the only strategic partner of Islamic Republic of Iran in the South Caucasus. The importance of ties with Iran to Armenia is dictated primarily by prospect of ending dependence on energy supplies from Russia through Georgian territory. Now this problem is a top priority for Yerevan. Transportation routes linking Armenia with outside world pass via Iran. In terms of economic and transportation isolation, as a result of occupation of Azerbaijani territories, Iran plays an important role for Armenia as a country that provides strategically important outlet to Asia and the Middle East. Here is the real policy of Iranian regime. Tehran stands in defense of poor and oppressed Muslims worldwide. And here we see that the 600 kilometers border with Muslim Azerbaijan, 20% of whose territory is occupied, and which has 1 million Muslim refugees. Iran develops a relationship with Armenia, country of aggressor. We can often hear about aggressive Israeli regime against Palestinians, and never aggressive here about Armenia against Shiite Muslim Azerbaijan. So why did the Iranian political elite and leaders not condemn Armenia, which occupied 20% of Azerbaijan territory and refused to implement the 4 United Nations Security Resolution, requiring Armenia to withdraw from the occupied Azerbaijani territory? It would be timely to remember the great words of the Foreign Minister and the later Prime Minister of Great Britain, Lord Palmerston. We have no eternal allies and we have no perpetual enemies. Our interests are eternal and perpetual. Unfortunately, this is a now harsh reality of international relations, and Azerbaijan has to understand and realize this. Concerning Russia, my friends and my colleagues said about Russia, and I think I agree with my colleagues, and this is a fact that Russia has been not only a geopolitical player in the Karabakh conflict, but also is a direct participant in it. Many Azerbaijanians feel that Russia has disproportionately favored Armenia in this conflict, and the more generally it has often pursued pro-Armenian policies at the expense of Azerbaijan. It is a fact that Russia seeks to regain predominance over the South Caucasus through military presence, manipulation of ethnic conflicts, control over energy, support for Moscow-oriented local political forces. Russia applies a policy paradigm of controlled instability in the South Caucasus through peacekeeping and mediation. Armenia considers military political cooperation with Russia to be an essential element of security and defense policy. Russia has a military base in Armenia, and during the visit by the then Russian President Dmitry Medvedev to Armenia in August 2010, Armenia agreed to extend basing agreement with Russia till 2044 year. Russian border guards assist Armenia in protecting the borders, Turkey and Iran. Armenia is an active member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization and is only member of this organization in the region. Armenia has remained very dependent on Russia, with a fundamental economic and security link that fit this dependency. Isolated in the region of South Caucasus because the occupation of Azerbaijani land, Armenia has no diplomatic relations with Azerbaijan and Turkey, and the main geopolitical and geo-economic projects develop the Caspian oil and gas resources bypass the country. On the other hand, Azerbaijan is a Muslim, secular nation with a strong cultural and linguistic connection with Turkey. NATO member has never placed much trust in Russia. Excuse me, I need water. I need water. Excuse me. Maybe I talking with my heart. It is a problem. Okay. Thus, even from the beginning of the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and the more towards with the 19th, it was clear that Russia supported the aggressive and occupation policy of Armenia and was doing its best to empower official Yerevan as much possible. In the 1992, Russia military forces from 366 Motorized Infantry Brigade stationed in Nagorno-Karabakh helped Armenians capture the strategic point of Khojaly and committed massacre more than 600 civilians in one night. I would like to present you my presentation that I presented before 2 months in the President Shimon Peres Peace Institute in Israel. Rambled. Yeah. There are geographical names that represent much more than just a dot on the map. The names of the villages and towns that have become symbol of cruelty and brutality. Babi Yar, Lidice, Oradur, Khatin, Songmi. In the early 19th, on the last century, this list included another name, Azerbaijani town of Khojaly. It did not happen 100 years ago. Cruel and bloody scenes of this tragedy will forever remain in the hearts of Azerbaijani people. On one night, it was largely destroyed, one of the oldest settlements of Azerbaijan, Khojaly. This tragedy is a crime against humanity. It took place at the end of the 20th century in the town Khojaly in Azerbaijan. This is a historical fact that Armenian armed forces and gunmen spared none of the Khojaly residents who had now managed to leave the city and surrounding as a result of atrocities of Armenian armed forces. 630 people dead. You can see pictures. It is awful sick pictures, I think. 487 maimed. 1,275 people who were taken hostages and subjected to torture and humiliation. The fates of 150 people are known to this day. They are women, children, and elderly. This presentation is a tribute to the memories of innocent civilians of Khojaly in Azerbaijan, who were killed, burned, and torn to the pieces. The world needs to know about this tragedy, to know and remember, to pass from father to son, the bloody, chilling testimonies of barbaric crimes of Armenian fascists against peaceful residents of Azerbaijan city of Khojaly. According to the Serge Sarkisyan, who is the current president of Armenia, before Khojaly, Azerbaijanians thought that they were joking with us. They thought that Armenians were people who could not raise their hand against civilian population. We were able to break that stereotype. It is very difficult to say about it, but it is a fact, and we have no comment concerning these words. The world should know that it is a crime directed not only against Azerbaijan, but against humanity. Right now, you can see pictures with the people in high post in Armenia. Seyran Ohanian, from here. It is a defense minister of Armenia today. Serge Sarkisyan, current president of Armenia. Robert Kachiryan, former president of Armenia, and others. They are organizers of incident of genocide, must be brought before international court. Crime should not go unpunished. The world community should condemn the Armenian military political aggression against Azerbaijan. International organizations, parliaments of the world should give international political and legal assessment of Khojaly genocide committed by Armenia in Azerbaijan as a true genocide. All that is necessary for the forces of evil to win in the world is enough, good man, to do something. The purpose of this presentation is to reach as many good, brave, and honest people as possible, so that the people of the world could say, I know and I'm not indifferent. Justice for Khojaly. In spite of this tragic presentation, and in spite of the war of frozen conflict with Armenia, Azerbaijan is a unique example of peaceful coexistence and cooperation among representatives of many nations and faiths. Judaism and Islam, Christianity and fire worship have existed in the ancient land. Azerbaijan's tolerance is not Western import. It is homegrown, even ancient. The multinational, multi-confessional society is one of Azerbaijani's assets. All nationalities see their religion respect. The most severe impact that could undermine the tradition of multiculturalism and tolerance in Azerbaijan was the Armenian aggression against Azerbaijan. As a result, 20% of Azerbaijani land were occupied and 1 million refugees were forced to leave their homes. As an Israeli citizen and the representative of Azerbaijan diaspora in Israel, I can proudly say that the leadership of Azerbaijan shows caring and warm attitude to the tradition of Jewish community in the country, which has history 2,500 years. Krasnaya Sloboda is the only unique place of compact residence of Jews in the world. And this is a real pride of Azerbaijan. It is a historical fact that Jews were ministers of independent Azerbaijan Democratic Republic in the 1918-1920, the first parliamentary democratic republic in the Muslim East. Jews are linked by a common destiny, now chanced during the tragic events when Armenian Dashnaks, the massacre slaughter in Azerbaijani cities. State of Israel, first of all, respects the territorial integrity of Azerbaijan and appreciates the role of government of Azerbaijan in the warm and sincere respect to the Jewish community. Speaking at the Israeli parliament 2 years ago, I said, anti-Semitism has never existed in Azerbaijan, and we as natives of Azerbaijan, as the Azerbaijan diaspora in Israel, are proud of the tolerance factor. Azerbaijan is a genuine example of inter-civilizational dialogue. I said in the Israeli Knesset before 2 years, show me another country, Muslim and Christian, where under the patronage of President and the First Lady, 2 synagogues and the largest Jewish educational center in the South Caucasus were built. I think you will simply not find a second country. Thank you very much for attention.
Thank you very much. We had 2 perspectives. Yes, please, Mr. Guliyev.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank both of our presenters, and I think it was very interesting to know for those who don't know in details about Nagorno-Karabakh conflicts. But actually, I have one question and one suggestion actually. Let me start from suggestion. The idea of having this conference was to elaborate some ideas, some initiatives, or some feedbacks from the distinguished experts, how to let's say, elaborate how to handle with the existing conflicts in 3 areas, in 3 countries, and how to, let's say, recommend to the politicians, to the people who really makes a decision on behalf of their respective countries. And also, it would be very interesting to know from your point concerning the close, let's say, intervention of international mediators or international power or some the countries who really have interest in the region. So this is why it would be a good idea if really we get some fresh information, fresh ideas, fresh suggestion from your side. And also maybe at the end of the conference we could have some conclusion. Also we could elaborate all these proposals or suggestions and put in some, let's say, paper, or maybe we can also put in our website or to send our stakeholders who are really interested in that. Of course, this is very understandable that the protected or unresolved conflicts, why it is not being resolved so far. We know the root of that, and we know the reason, the main reason standing or being impeding to get forward. If you remember in my speech, I asked to discuss about the possible way of imposing the country who violates international law. Some of them might be sanctions that we are very frequently discussing in the case of Russia. How you think these, let's say, tools or leverages could be applicable with other cases or with other conflicts? Maybe we should also think about that, and your positive impacts would be interesting. And also, one of the challenging issue is having no environment for confidence building measures. Of course, we do understand that without confidence, it would be very difficult to bring the sides' position closer to each other. So what do you think about that? Our suggestion, our idea was about to bring the Armenian-Azerbaijan communities living in Nagorno-Karabakh, because they have to define the further or future legal status of the region. Without, let's say, close participation of one side, it would not be applicable, it would not be realistic or effective. So this is why I want to just to ask you to know or to get your feedbacks about some practical issues and some practical momentums that could be lead to the solution of the conflicts. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I look at the panelists to start responding, and then everyone is welcome to join them with their suggestions and recommendations.
Thank you very much for wonderful comments. I absolutely agree that the practical part is very, very important here. And as we're talking and been talking about Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, in that sense, what I concluded is actually may seem less optimistic than I intended it to be. Yeah, geopolitical changes don't come easily, and the enforcement of international law heavily depends on the will of states. What to do in a situation like that, and I mentioned Azerbaijan seems the only interested side to proceed with the resolution of the conflict. And when it comes to Azerbaijan, I think we're doing most of what we can to influence the situation. And we'll be doing 2 times, 3 times more. And I know because we've been progressively increasing our efforts, and that's a continuous process. But what I would recommend practically for those who are concerned with the conflict as well, for friends and partners, especially from from the European Union, for example, to finally get to call the things with the names that they are. The occupation is occupation, and the aggression is aggression. And if you would be retaining the balanced approach to the situation in Nagorno-Karabakh, that actually would compromise and be disproportion of what we're witnessing, for example, right now in Crimea. It's one of the things. Balanced approach to the conflict like that is not an objective approach. It's not a just approach, and you would have to come up with a solid view on the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict and call the things the names they are. We don't even see that. Not even that far going as to the sanctions, as Mr. Guliyev just notified that the sanctions would be very nice, and because we are only ones left with doing something like sanctions against Armenia, us and Turkey. Thank them very much. And this is the first practical steps towards recognizing the problem as it is and not trying to cover it up under the political false pretext that you need to have a balance between the sides of a conflict. And the more you do that, I would argue, the more it was going like that in this balanced approach, the starker the reminder that we are witnessing right now with the referendums that went out in Crimea, for example, as to that how the people's rights to self-determination can be speculated upon. Again, there is the Crimea are not a people in terms of United Nations Charter, and again, when you have a territory inside your country that's been officially recognized, that's been recognized by people for a very long time, it means that that territory belongs to the people and the nation as a whole, not only to the people that reside on this territory, just as the other parts of Kiev belongs to the Crimeans, and the God forbid, the independence of Kiev would be the matter for all the people in Ukraine, including the Crimea, to decide. Same thing goes to any country. That's and if you go beyond that, if you're not calling it out as it is, that's going to continue. You cannot think about new and more practical steps like sanctions, like making the aggressor state understand that there are boundaries and that the boundaries have been agreed to prior to the changes in political situation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Diba, you were sort of raised your hand.
I have two clarification questions to Kemal, and the more analytical question. I'm going to try to keep them short. Don't worry. Kemal, in November, bilateral discussions were kickstarted again, and I'm curious as to where you see them going, and that I heard there was a positive sort of beginning and then a fizzling soon after when the foreign ministers met in Paris or wherever. Another clarification question. You mentioned the districts adjacent to Karabakh that would need to be withdrawn from before the opening of transportation, communication, and whatnot links, according to the sort of Madrid principle-based process. Now, there seems to be a misunderstanding or an issue that everybody speaks on a different level about how many districts. Like in Turkey, the common wisdom has become, and I don't know how it's spread, that 2 districts is what the expectation is to begin with. Whereas when I talk to Azerbaijani counterparts, it's like all the districts, 7 districts. So I'd like to hear your view on that. And a more analytical question, is it a good time or is it not a good time to push for the resolution of Karabakh? And that, I was thinking it's a good time. 2015 is coming. We're going to have all these crises again. Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia, it's all going to become a mess. And then we had the Swiss chairmanship, 2-year. They're more deliberative, a little bit more interested in this issue. It seemed like it was an opportune period in 2014. Now post-Crimea, as far as I hear from the Swiss, and I talked to the State Secretary last week about this, he said, all bets are off in terms of what we're talking about with the Russians. The agenda has shifted. Karabakh is probably not going to be on our Russia agenda discussions for some time now. And I think one could also make the argument that at this time, where I think we've all somewhat recognized Russia has the upper hand in the region, at least short term. Is this a good time to start moving things around? Would it not be possible for Russia to take advantage of any opportunity that a change brings, be it grievances within Armenia or Azerbaijan because of a deal that's being worked on, or other political rivals that can be created? Somehow would Russia take advantage of the moving around of some balls if the Karabakh resolution was focused on intently at this particular time? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your questions. I tried to answer them as brief as you posted them, and the same line of being asked. Negotiations. How many times have we witnessed the same pattern? That's what I was talking about just in my presentation. Start optimistically and then go back into the same devilish loop that comes to much less. The situation becomes very pessimistic. But again, this is the stagnation of a process, and I think this circle is continuing and continuing and continuing and continuing again and again and again, and that's due to the fact that nothing really changes geopolitically in the region, and the interests remain, the clash of interests remain, and everything is going to go on the same pattern. Again, Azerbaijan would be the one championing the flag of let's do something already, but nothing is going to come of it once there won't be at least the second interest inside there that has any say in the conflict. Right now, I don't think this is going to go there. That doesn't mean that the talks and the negotiations are meaningless. Never. You have to keep that always, even if it leads to the same again result, because that makes the situation being a non-frozen conflict. That the international community cares, that someone wants this to happen, is already an optimistic vibe towards the situation. Maybe in the future something will change, and hopefully in the future something will change, and then the negotiations will fall out of that kind of a circle. In short term, I don't see that, and I don't think there would be any analyst that would say contrary to that. 5+2. 5+2 was one of the ideas coined during the 2000s period of the negotiations only once, and somehow I have to agree with you that it became popular in Turkey because I think that there was an involvement of Turkey in this idea, though limited. On that, at first there might be a very good step as to show the goodwill in the conflict, but generally what we've been talking about in Madrid's principles and everything, all of the occupied territories, including the 7 regions and Nagorno-Karabakh autonomous oblast, former autonomous oblast, should see the withdrawal of the troops. There should be a demilitarization of the territories to have a peaceful resolution. So no guns, peacekeepers, preferably not armed as well, like they try to do it in the United Nations way. Then confidence building measures, etc., etc., etc. That's the ideal situation. But 5+2 is just or 2+5 is just one of the scenarios of how it's going to be. It's a matter of negotiations, and it's a matter of coming to the consensus. It's going to be, I don't know, 6+1 at first, and then 2 more, and then 3 more, and then how are we going to do that? Whatever it's going to be, maybe all at the same time. We never know. That's again going to be determined in the results of negotiations. But that doesn't mean that this is imperative or the other such option is imperative. It's details. You have to agree on the principles first. To push or not to push with the resolution. I think this is very different to me. Push every time, every second. I mean, you have to push for a resolution of a conflict. You cannot let the matters flow as they are. If you do that, you are going to make the matters worse. You're going to seal the deal probably at some point. You would not even notice it, and the de facto situation slips into the Euro situation, and then into the trauma of the people for the rest of their lives. That's even medicine, I think. any change that that is happening outside the region, for example, in the neighboring regions, like you mentioned the situation in Ukraine and everything, is important in terms of your actions concerning the resolution of the conflict and what kind of political steps you are going to take. And I'm sure there are matters ranging from the diplomacy to security in this kind of spectrum. But I think this is not the defining impulse of to push or not to push. To push is the imperative. The only matter is how are you? I don't think the Russia has an upper hand in anything right now, simply because when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, though Russia used it as a way and means to apply the political pressure to the sides, the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is used to apply pressure to Armenia than to Azerbaijan. Because despite the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, Azerbaijan was able to achieve apart from resoluting it, all the geostrategical goals it has set out. We have our energy routes, we have our economic growth, we have our democratic development, we have our social development. We do all that. We don't have considerable options of pressure from Russia in any other kind of matters, because we are not dependent on the trade with them, we're not dependent on the energy projects with them. They are very weak in soft power. We have 150,000 people of the Russian community. None of them are pro-Russian, just because of the fact that simply religious and worship places were built for Azerbaijani money, and we invested in our Russian community just as we invested into any other minority, national or religious or ethnic minority in Azerbaijan. And guess who are they going to support in any case? We don't have this. We have shielded information space that does not suffer from the what you call the information war and what Russia is trying to extrapolate. The RIA Novosti agency, no one even knows that the RIA Novosti agency is present in Azerbaijan, just because the Russians are not putting any money to it. And I think they even asked our government to invest in the RIA Novosti, and that was very strange. Shoot ourselves in the leg? Okay, but of course. In Armenia, for example, this is one of the most quoted news agencies, because Armenians are investing money in them, but they are investing the money that they get from Russians for that matter. Just things like that. And the only thing that is left here is Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and even that is not already a tool it used to be in Russian hands. So I hope I answered your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, it is a tool enough to turn Armenia away from EU association agreement negotiations, but I'm glad to hear that at least in your assessment, it's not a tool of impact on Azerbaijan. So, Alistair James.
Ovaid is my name, in fairness. Right, I just got a couple of points, stroke questions, less analytical than Nigaz, really. In response to Azai's plea for solutions from the West, let me just say something that I know you already know. Okay, why are there no solutions forthcoming from the West for Nagorno-Karabakh? Well, one is because the West can't do it. In order to have a solution for Nagorno-Karabakh, the leaders of Armenia and Azerbaijan need to want it themselves, quite frankly, and they don't want it, especially on the Armenian side. I perfectly will agree, because possession is 9/10 of the law, and Armenia's got what it wants right now, and there's a status quo. So, but unless there is a willingness on both sides, and both sides are guilty of this at times, but I accept the Armenian guilt here. But unless there is willingness on both sides to come to a brokered solution themselves, then the West just can't do it. The West can be a mediator, a facilitator, an advisor. And that's the most as you're ever going to get, because right now, it's just the dissonance is so intractable. The differences are so intractable. I mean, that the West isn't really all that interested again. And you know this again, if I may. The second reason is because of Russia and Russia's role. Russia doesn't really want a solution either. It is helpful for Russia to have a frozen conflict. It supports all its aims, not least because it's selling weapons to both sides. And I'll come back to that point, incidentally, in a second. And the third reason, I'm afraid to say, is because of Azerbaijan itself. And with the greatest of respect, persuaded as I broadly am by your arguments, then let's face it, Azerbaijan is not exactly a model democracy, and I put that mildly. In fact, it's I'm not willing to suggest that Armenia is as bad, but it's a close run thing. But it makes it easy for the West. You know, when you think of dynastic succession, when you think of autocracy, when you think of the human rights issues in Azerbaijan, for the West to simply ignore Azerbaijan. Why? The West, or even to Khajali, the West will think simplistically, okay, because the West is simplistic, that why should we bother helping Azerbaijan when Azerbaijan is an out-and-out autocracy? So working on Azerbaijan's democratic deficit would do a tremendous amount to working towards a Nagorno-Karabakh case, because it would give the West less excuse for an out. Right now, the West doesn't have to think about it. Oh, autocracy. Let's not deal with it. So that is a serious problem, and I say that with the greatest of respect because I am broadly persuaded by your case. I really am. But quite honestly, you don't help your case because of your democratic deficit. Because it gives the West an easy out. And there are other things that don't help the Azerbaijani case. You know, the Safirov case, the human rights issues. There are a number of things where Azerbaijan has also, again, with the greatest of respect, not come up to standards. So that is why there are no international solutions forthcoming. And now a specific question to you, Kamal. Yes. Sorry? So a specific question, which goes back to the point I very briefly raised, because again, I am persuaded by your case. I fully understand. It's not a problem. But if you are going to be truly honest again, you mentioned Azerbaijan is now taking Russian weaponry. Okay, and in spite of everything you're saying about Russia, about it being a dishonest broker, about its allegiances with Armenia, about the base, about the CSTO, about everything else, and yet you're still taking Russian weapons, and it just strikes me as being somewhat disingenuous. But more than that, I honestly, it's a very, very specific, direct question to you. Why did you not even mention? You didn't even mention it, and it's almost, and I don't understand why you wouldn't even mention it in your presentation, because it's a significant point now.
Okay, to the comment and then to the question. Comments. Okay. Two people are fighting. Neither is always absolutely right. Okay, that's true. But to the West, really, you think the West cannot help? But if we were being honest, okay, let's be honest. West cannot help. West is not willing to help. It's not. It can. If there is an aggression, and if there is something bothering West, then it can be 5-minute resolution like Libya, and after 5 minutes it's implemented outside the scope of the resolution, not just in the resolution, but outside the scope. Another breach in international law, for example, as if we'll be absolutely and brutally honest. And when it comes to Nagorno-Karabakh, the resolutions are there for how many years? And nothing really happening. No sanctions, no condemnation of aggression, anything. And it doesn't matter what the political status of the country is. The breach of international law and the aggression is punishable, should be punishable at any state. If it would be Saudi Arabia, it's probably aggression of Saudi Arabia. I probably would not be making excuses that there is a monarch with there's absolute monarchy there, and it's not democratic. Whatever my thoughts about our political situation, that's irrelevant even here. Russian weaponry. I stand corrected. I did forget about that. Well, let's do this. And again, come back to the West. Are you selling weapons to us? No, not really, right? We have to get weapons somewhere and somehow. That is the second, after the closing the border with Armenia, that is the second tool at our disposal. The only other one of the two, to be able to pressure Armenia, increasing our military potential. to do that. This is a pressure itself, in itself. And the only way you can do that is by building up and making our forces stronger, and we need weapons for that. And where we can buy them? Whenever we can. We are not only buying them from Russia, we are buying them from South Africa, we're buying them from Israel. Let's say we are cooperating with everybody we can, including the country that, including Armenia's ally. Okay. Yeah. Well, do they sell weapons? It's business as usual. We're going to buy them, and we're going to increase our military potential, and that is another way how we can pressure Armenia. No one else does that. If we are not going to do that, I think we're going to only play in their hand, because they are going to get weapons from their ally, and they are going to get them in amounts that wouldn't be even dreaming of getting for free from anybody. So I wouldn't say that the avoidance of. I thought in my head it sounded very clear that if you are not getting the high-tech weapons from somebody, if someone has embargo, you would go to the other side. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Well, if we're being brutally honest, don't let our honesty descend into brutality. But yes, Ari, and then Mr. Azai.
I have comments concerning your autocracy and democratic regime in Azerbaijan. I think that the United States and the West do not understand the region, do not understand Middle East, do not understand region of the South Caucasus. For example, you can see situation in the Egypt. Mubarak, 35 years was ally of United States. After 35 years, he was in prison now. Yes? Okay? And in this situation, after Mubarak, what do we see? One moment. What do we see? We see terrorists in the power. We see Al-Qaeda. We see terrorist organization in the region. Do you want a terrorist organization in Azerbaijan? Concerning your autocracy, you said autocracy in Azerbaijan. I think it is not a future for Azerbaijan. Our Azerbaijan future is a secular state with the democratic institutions. And I think it is a problem that West and United States do not understand it.
Can I just very briefly, I'll take
yes.
Okay, you're not understanding me. It's very simple. Okay, Libya, and all these other examples. Saudi Arabia,
Egypt,
Egypt,
yeah.
Libya, Egypt. The West is hypocritical. The West will lie. The West, quite frankly, excuse my language, behaves like bastards. Okay, you have not understood. So don't come at me with. There's no point in coming with other examples here of where the West has gotten it wrong. Of course, we don't understand the South Caucasus. Of course, we don't understand the Middle East. We absolutely do not. Of course, you wouldn't defend the American relationship with Saudi Arabia. Of course not. It's just obvious. I'm not here to defend the West. I don't work for a Western government. I work for an independent think tank. The West behaves despicably. Okay? Mm-hmm. So my point is that doesn't mean to say that Azerbaijan should as well. My simple point is that Azerbaijan, in order to improve its case, should work on its own game at home, because the West isn't going to get any better. The West isn't going to make any. You seem to have this bizarre faith that the West is some sort of paragon of virtue. It is absolutely not. So I understand what you're saying about where we have intervened in Libya but not in Azerbaijan, and where we have alliances with Saudi Arabia but not with. But it doesn't make any sense to me, because we get it wrong all the time, and we will continue to get it wrong. It's just crazy. Two wrongs don't make a right.
I think that Aria's point, at least partly, was that I think we shouldn't actually get too deep into this, but I think that Aria's point, at least partly, was that given the hypocrisy and or sort of unequal attitude towards different political regimes, and the change in the structure, in the democratic structure of Azerbaijan, may not lead to its case. Well, I think that was sort of, the underlying argument that this doesn't work symmetrically. But Mr. Zayguliev requested the floor, and I think that should be probably our sort of concluding point before we adjourn for lunch.
Thank you very much. I respect your point concerning the democracy in Azerbaijan. Everybody has its own approach or opinion about what's going on in different region. But of course, I cannot agree with you that because first of all, this is not a matter of democracy or undemocracy or having some regime. What was our concern first? The first concern was that it is not unfair to compare Azerbaijan with Armenia and to put in the same scale. We are talking about the conflict, we are talking about the aggression, we are talking about the violation of the international law. But our worry is why West and our best ally, including the United States and the European Union, don't make any decisive decisions, don't use their capacity in order to force Armenia to bring the peace. If you compare, if you just link with democratic regime, it is totally different. It is, I cannot agree with you. If you just look at the regime in Armenia, you can easily see that how it is going to be degraded, to be worsening. And also in the last election, even though that took place in Armenia, presidential election, it is, but this is why, of course, you cannot just put the reason that Western allies don't support the fairness or justice just because Azerbaijan has some problem. If to talk about democracy in Azerbaijan, of course, we cannot say that Azerbaijan democracy is perfect, but we did a lot of progress in that. The country who has a small experience of democratic development, I think for the last 5 or 10 years, you could easily see that how the democratization process is going on, how the political institution is growing up. Our government, the parliament pays enough attention to that, not just by showing to Western ally that we are good, but it is our strategic choice. And also, when I was so surprised when Armenia officially denied to join to Eastern Partnership Program, and they declared about the joining to the custom union. But what was the reaction of Brussels? It was surprisable. Brussels did nothing for that. Even okay, you should take care after Armenia because it is Armenian friends. This is double standards. Maybe you don't know about the public mood in my country. It is really terrible. It really damages and undermines the trust and confidence towards the Western Union, towards the democratic, let's say, civilization that you call it. This is why the experts sometimes trying to misuse and misrepresent, also trying to just, not only find excuse, but just trying to, to do it as a way that really Azerbaijan is not the country who should deserve this type of attention or this type of support. This is why I think it should be a little bit objective, and we hear, not only here, just but from all the people and from the experts who really engage in the region should know that really it is the matter that we need the equal approach, the objective approach, and of course the way that could help the solution of the problem. There should not be any double standard, because aggressor is aggressor in everywhere. I am just repeating. We are talking about the Russians to have a sanction against Russia. Why we should not think about the same leverages, the same tool against Armenia? Yeah. What is the difference between Russia and Armenia in that case? Armenia captured Azerbaijani lands, Russia captured Crimea. What is the difference? Yeah. The difference is Armenia is a good guy, I mean, we cannot touch. But okay, Russia is our geopolitical enemy or geopolitical, opponent. But I think it should not work that, because this is the way that we.
But I don't disagree with you. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah. But it is my remark. It is my comment. I think it should be respected also.
Thank you. And Vladimir Sokor wants to have the final word in this discussion.
Answering Mr. Guliev's question that he asked at the beginning of this round-robin debate, first I would say reduce your expectations from the West to a minimum close to zero. That's point one. Point two, play your own game. How to play your own game? First, to highlight much more than you have done until now. Highlight the ineffectiveness of the international frameworks that have been set up to deal with the Karabakh conflict. Just all the time highlight their complete failure and bankruptcy, much more than you have done it until now. Second, continue to participate in these frameworks in a disciplined and loyal way. 100% continue to participate in these frameworks while delegitimizing them from the outside. And this will enable you to set the stage for asserting your right to self-defense. Because all this, highlighting the bankruptcy of existing efforts, will substantiate your right at some point to resort to self-defense. And say this all the time. Underscore more than you have done until now your right to self-defense. On the question of the system of government in Azerbaijan, I think you do have a public relations problem. I don't think you have a system problem. In my view, the system of government in Azerbaijan is a great success story. It is based on the institution of the executive presidency, which has ensured for Azerbaijan political stability. It has freed Azerbaijan from the nightmare of parliamentary political coalitions. It has enabled Azerbaijan to plan for the long term, to set a long-term strategy, without being absorbed into internal political infighting. Azerbaijani society, with all due respect, is not yet prepared for Western-style parliamentary democracy. It will take at least one more generation, at least, if that. So the system is exactly what you need. The system of the executive presidency was highly successful in Georgia while it existed. It ensured the successful reforms because it was not a parliamentary system. The parliamentary system failed utterly in Ukraine and in Moldova. But you have the right system. And the fact that it was, the presidency was transmitted along hereditary lines, this was not because of bloodlines. It was based on performance. The two Aliyevs were presidents, and the institution of the presidency was inherited based on performance, as substantiated by public opinion polls and election results. The current president performs very well. That's why he's president and will continue to be. So you don't have a system problem, but you have a public relations problem. For example, you could reduce the terms of imprisonment of some political opponents. You don't need to sentence them to 4 years, 5 years. You can even maybe change your legislation to avoid sentencing them at all. Or if they do behave in subversive ways, or if you can prove that they act on behalf of foreign forces, you can reduce their terms of imprisonment and then amnesty them, include them in some amnesties. So this is the kind of public relations problems you have. And that will not help you obtain outright support from the West to resolve the Karabakh conflict, but it at least would neutralize the ill-wishers in the West. There are ill-wishers in the West. You have to neutralize those ill-wishers. But this is only anticipating on what I'm going to say tomorrow.
Thank you. Before it descends into further sort of fervent discussion, I declare the break. Well, let's thank the panelists. But we still have good time to finish our discussions. And so I give the floor now to Kamil Calus, research fellow at the Center for Eastern Studies. I might add, actually, that the Center for Eastern Studies, that's Ośrodek Studiów Wschodnich, it's a oldest Sovietologist think tank, which before the war, when Vilnius was a contentious issue and a site for another frozen conflict, was established here in this city. And in fact, it started its activities in the 20s and was the first analytical center to analyze.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for the invitation to this wonderful event. Thank you for organizers from both sides. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I do believe that I should start with a small explanation. Although the title of my presentation is, as it will say, Transnistrian Conflict, Price of an Agreement, I have to say it straight that I will not provide you with any reliable idea in solving the Transnistrian conflict. No one ever truly did it before, and however, many competent people tried, and I'm definitely not as competent as most of them to compete with their ideas. My intention today is different. First of all, I would like to show you the very reasons why the Transnistrian conflict, which started in 1990, have not been solved till today. Why the negotiations, which started almost immediately after the end of Moldovan-Transnistrian War in 1992, had actually never brought us any closer to the solution. This would be the key question, which, as I hope, would allow us to better understand present state of play. After we will deal with this problem, I will try to show you how the situation with the Transnistrian issue changed in the last few weeks due to the developments in the Ukraine and due to a visible shift in the Russian way of policy making. Then, at the end, I will try to speculate a bit about possible further developments, of course, in the context of this developments on the Ukraine. For at the very moment, ladies and gentlemen, we can be really close to the solution of the protracted conflict and the reunification of a country. The only problem is that this solution would not be convenient nor for Moldova nor for the West. Ladies and gentlemen, I've got actually a very nasty habit of speaking very fast during conferences. So if it will become a really big problem, then please just let me know, just shout something, and I will try to slow down. Okay, but before we will come to that, what I was talking about, let's start from the question I've mentioned on the very beginning. So, why the Transnistrian problem still exists after 22 years of permanent talks and negotiations? Why? Well, the answer is complex, but if we would have to make it simple, then I would say that Transnistrian problem still exists because its resolution is A, not in the interest of Chisinau and Tiraspol, B, is in the interest of Russia, but only on Russian terms, C, is in the interest of West, but of course not on the Russian terms. I have to make a small remark here. Right now, let's assume that by solving Transnistrian issue, we understand the reunification of a country. I will later on explain why. Those just mentioned collateral interests of three main actors, or a group of actors, forms a kind of triangle in which those interests balance each other and actually rule out any possible change of status quo. Okay, but this is just a framework. Let me now put a substance in the scheme and talk in a bit more detailed way about those interests of particular actors. Let's start from Chisinau. I've just put a thesis that reunification is not in the interest of Moldovan authorities. Of course, from the point of view of any former or present Moldovan government, this assumption is surely, to be euphemistic, controversial. It's blasphemy, actually. The official policy of Moldovan government was always aimed at resolving the Transnistrian problem by reunification of the country. The very creation of the Bureau for Reintegration confirms that official position, as well as the law on the special status of Transnistria adopted by Parliament in 2005, which theoretically regulates the status of the left bank within one and undividable Moldova, and many other official documents, including the very constitution. But this is just an official position on which Moldova have to stand still due to mostly external factors. Okay. Thank you very much. Yes, this is what I meant exactly. The reality differs from the official statement, however. From the point of view of Chisinau, reintegration is inconvenient, at least for the 6 reasons. First, political and economical cost of reintegration would be too high and would not be accepted by the Moldovan politicians. Well, I believe that we all know the simple truth that the main goal of any ruling party or any ruling coalition in virtually any country in the world is to stay in power, is to be re-elected. In case of Moldova, we have to have in mind that eventual reunification of this country would probably result in a massive fall of support for the government that will be actual author of this reunification. It will happen for 2 reasons, actually. One, the short and medium term economical cost of reunification would be very high and would be felt by relevant part of society. The very cost of reintegration are very hard to estimate at the moment, but they must be worth at least about $4 billion, and this is just a gas debt accumulated by Tiraspol for 20 years. In the case Republic of Moldova would agree to pay the Gazprom Tiraspol's debt, Moldova public debt per capita would exceed $1,100, which means that it will grow twice from the current level of about $500. Therefore, I believe that a considerable number of voters would start to blame government for its successful reunification and would start to think in, let's say, nostalgic way about times before reintegration. We could try to argument that Moldovan society would be able to accept this cost in the name of the unity of a country for the sake of patriotism, but I'm afraid that this would be a wrong assumption. Most of Moldovans do not feel sentiment toward territories on the left bank of Dniester River, which never actually were considered historical Moldovan-Romanian lands. Generally speaking, Moldovans don't believe in eventual reunification of a country, and what's even more important, they don't feel a need for this to happen. Most of Moldovans have never ever been to Transnistria, except transit, of course. When we look on the opinion polls, we will see that Transnistrian problem is one of the less important problems for Moldovans, far behind poverty, corruption, even cultural development, education, of course, and so on. Only 2% of Moldovans claim that Transnistria problem should be treated with priority, and only about 14% of Moldovans claim that this is a problem at all. Therefore, it's safe to assume that from the perspective of society, the fact that country would become reunited would probably not compensate the economic losses. This would lead to the fall of support for the government among citizens of the right bank Moldova. But there is also the other threat for the government connected with reunification. It's the 220,000 Transnistrians who after reunification would take part in the Moldova-wide parliamentary elections. Transnistrian would be strongly pro-Russian electorate which would almost certainly not vote for any Moldovan pro-European parties, which are seen by them as pro-Romanian in general terms. Therefore, for any European government, pro-European government, reunification would backfire with increased number of voters who would generally vote against those parties. Actually, to some extent, this works for Communist Party as well. Communists are pro-Russian, at least at the moment, but they are not very much liked by Transnistrians because of the policy that President Voronin used to conduct against Tiraspol in times when communists were in power. It's very possible that Transnistrian, would give their vote for some third political party, maybe some new political power in the country. To conclude, reacquiring of Transnistria would result in a major fall in the support for the government that would be in power at that time. And this would be caused both by the decline in the domestic support on the right bank and appearing of a big number of new pro-Russian voters from the left bank. So this was the first argument. Second, the very existence of Transnistria, a territory which functions outside the framework of international legal system, creates a very comfortable conditions for various kinds of illegal activities, which is, I believe, widely understandable, which would not be possible, or at least would be far more difficult in case Transnistria would be de facto part of Moldova. It is obvious that local Transnistrian authorities and the business related to those authorities are using the opportunity which is given to them by the status quo to enrich themselves. But the authorities in Tiraspol are not the only one to benefit. Despite the lack of hard data, there is a lot of evidence that certain part of political elites in Moldova seems to be involved in such activities as well. I'm far from pointing out any particular names, but it's almost sure that during the 8 years of communist rules between 2001 and 2009, some high-level politicians from the Communist Party or their relatives were benefiting from the cooperation with Transnistrian business and Transnistrian authorities. Do the same thing take place under current government? I think it's safe to assume that it does, at least to some extent. The solution of Transnistrian problem could deprive them from their source of income, and therefore it's not welcome by them. Third, Reintegration would result in limited competences of the government in Chisinau. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we have to admit that the only possible scenario for the reunification of Moldova is, from the technical or geopolitical even perspective, its federalization. It doesn't seem possible that any other reunification scenario different than federalization, is possible given the differences between right and left bank of the country and, what's even more important, Russian pressure, on which I will, of course, talk a little bit later. Both Transnistria and Russia would never consent on status different than subject of federation. If we will agree on this assumption, then we have to take under consideration the fact that in this hypothetical future federation, Transnistria, and who knows, maybe also Gagauzia, would have a considerable influence on the policy of Chisinau. There would surely be some federal body like a Council of Federation or something like this, which would serve for the federation subject as a platform to not only for discussions, but also to the creation of laws and coordinating state policy, both internal and external. It's possible that in such institution Transnistria, and again, maybe Gagauzia as well, would have a right to block any decision that would be inconvenient for this region, or at least Transnistria would have enough representatives to form coalition against the policy of government in Chisinau. In both cases, whether Transnistria would have a veto right or would just have possibility to sabotage decisions of the government, reunification of a country means that Chisinau would have to share the power over lawmaking process, which is currently one of its exclusive prerogatives to the subject or subjects of the federation. And such limiting of power is definitely not in the interest of any Moldovan government. Fourth, resolving of Transnistrian issue would limit the Western interest in Moldova and would result in decline of foreign financial aid to this country. I know that this may sound strange for you, especially if we will take into consideration the current context. Moldova is on the brink of signing an association agreement, it would receive a visa-free regime in just a few days, and is still considered a success story of the Eastern Partnership, the last one. In this situation, it's hard to imagine that it can lose its attractiveness in the eyes of the West. You have to remember, however, that for many, many years, since the very beginning of Moldovan independence, the sometimes only factor that was actually attracting interest of the major foreign actors to this region was the very existence of the Transnistrian conflict. Moldova's economic and strategic insignificance rendered this country almost invisible for all main European and, generally speaking, Western players. But the fact that Moldovan Transnistria is a source of potential destabilization relatively near the EU borders was actually attracting interest, aid, and was the main reason to develop cooperation between Chisinau and the Western partners. From the Western point of view, the idea was to make this protracted conflict more manageable and more predictable by introducing Moldova, and to some extent Transnistria as well, into the international structures. With this came also financial help, development aid, and so on. However, Moldovan presence in the Eastern Partnership project seems for us obvious from today's perspective. It's not totally clear how the present situation and position of Moldova would have looked like if the Transnistria problem would not exist. It's not certain that in case of reunification, West would limit its interest in Moldova, but some part of political elites in Chisinau definitely sees no reason to risk such a possibility. Fifth, there is virtually no pressure on the solution from the Moldovan electorate. As it was presented before, reunification of a country can cause the government, which will manage to do this, to lose the next election due to the fall of the public support. On the other hand, there is no pressure from the Moldovan voters on the solution of Transnistrian issue. As I already mentioned, only 2% consider it to be a problem that needs to be solved as soon as possible. This threat of losing support and at the same time lack of the incentive from the side of the society may not be the most important factor that refrained Chisinau from pushing forward the solution, but it's certainly not a helping one. Sixth, and the last one here, a resolution of Transnistrian problem it will, trigger serious unrest in Gagauzia. This is the problem which I've mentioned just a few points before, while I was speaking about the federalization. Granting a status of the subject of the federation for Transnistria would probably trigger the reaction of Gagauz, the Turkic but Orthodox minority living in the Gagauz-Yeri, the autonomous administrative region in the southern part of Moldova. Gagauz became known to the wider audience just recently because of the illegal referendum during which 97% of voters, of course, so-called referendum, of voters opted against Moldova's integration with European Union and for joining Russian-led customs union. The region is very pro-Russian. Most of its inhabitants speak Russian, feel very connection to Russian culture, and generally consider themselves to be part of so-called Ruski Mir, the Russian world. The Gagauz people have got their own history of separatism. The current autonomy actually was an unrecognized state for as long as 4 years at the beginning of 90s. The local authorities proclaimed independence from Moldova almost 2 weeks before, okay, I will try to slow down, 2 weeks before Transnistria did. However, after 4 years of negotiations with Chisinau, Gagauz authorities decided to agree on reunification with Moldova on the basis of cultural and, to a limited extent, economical autonomy. It will be safe to assume that in case if Transnistria would receive a status of the subject of the federation, Gagauzia would argue that it deserved the same, that by granting such a status for Tiraspol only, Chisinau is actually rewarding Transnistria for its stubbornness and punishing Gagauzia for the fact that it decided to agree on the autonomy and resigned from its aspiration for the independence. It means that the resolution of Transnistrian problem would put Chisinau in a situation in which it would have to choose between two evils. First, making Gagauzia a federal subject or at least widening its autonomy, which would mean further limiting of power of Chisinau and widening the influence of Russian regions, or two, doing nothing and facing the highly possible unrest and growing separatism in the region. Let's now move to the perspective of Tiraspol. The thesis that the reunification is not in the interest of Transnistrian authorities is definitely far less controversial than my previous assumption on true Moldovan interest. Transnistria is putting its rights since many years already. Tiraspol is interested in negotiating its status, isn't interested in negotiating its status with Chisinau. Its official goal is international recognition and subsequent joining the Russian Federation. This goal is frequently expressed by Transnistrian leadership, which regularly refers to the so-called referendum from 2006 to ground its legitimacy. In this so-called referendum, about 98% of voters opted for such international recognition and subsequent joining Russia. The 5+2 negotiation format, which theoretically meant to be a platform for discussion over possible solution to the Transnistrian problem, is perceived by Transnistria merely as a forum for resolving minor economical and social matters, and definitely not an issue of possible reunification. In 2012, this format had been rendered pointless as a platform which could eventually bring the country back together. According to new so-called conception of foreign policy of Transnistria, which entered into force on November 2020, the separatist region declared integration with customs union and eventually with planned Eurasian Union as its main goal, vital for the region to develop and crucial for its survival. Since Chisinau is openly setting strategic course on the state on the integration with European Union, any talks concerning reunifications are by default groundless. Transnistria speaks openly about this, and it doesn't seem that Tiraspol would change its mind in a foreseeable future. But this is all, in fact, just the level of political declarations, which have way stronger roots than the ideology. Underneath those declarations, like in case of Moldova, there is also the real interest of Tiraspol. And the real interest of considerable part of Transnistrian elites is to preserve status quo. Primary concern of political and economic elite of Tiraspol is its own security and protection of its current political and economical privileges. The current status quo, politically, financially and militarily sponsored by Russia, is ensuring optimal conditions for the protection of its interests and the survival of separatism. On the other hand, reintegration on the basis of special status or even a federal subject represent an existential risk to its status, therefore is rejected from the very beginning. Well, that's true that Tiraspol don't want reunification with Moldova, but it seems as well that at least a part of it, the leadership, and it's actually an important part, is reluctant to joining Russia as well. Becoming a part of Russia would probably seriously limit the competences of what is now so-called Transnistrian government and would downgrade it to the status of local authorities and not the state leaders. It is uncertain what would happen with very generous Russian financial aid for the region, which is rising every year. Even if the aid would remain on the same level, its distribution would become surely better controlled by Russians, what could limit the possibility of corruption and embezzlement. Transnistria as a part of Russia would probably be finally forced to start paying for the gas it's consumed. The fact that Gazprom is now subsidizing Transnistria with virtually free gas, which is then being sold on the local market, is a source of unimaginable income for the certain political and economical actors in Transnistria. This is also the only reason that makes the bigger part of Transnistrian industry more or less competitive, as it can produce cheaper due to the cheaper fuel. Of course, Transnistria, if Transnistria would have to choose the lesser evil, it would decide to join Russia, but generally speaking, the preservation of status quo is the most optimal scenario for considerable part of local elites. Let's get to Russia. Well, Russian interest is surprisingly consistent with Moscow's officially declared position on Transnistrian issue. But of course, this doesn't mean that intentions of Kremlin from the Moldovan perspective are good and pure. Russia is officially recognizing and supporting Moldovan territorial integrity and claims that her goal is to help both sides to work out an acceptable solution, which would allow to both keep the territorial integrity of a country and protect the rights of the people living on the both sides of the Dniester River. In other words, Russia is generally almost from the very beginning was proposing creation of a federation of both entities, mainland Moldova and Transnistria. The reason for such a desire is simple. Creation of a federation would mean that the deeply pro-Russian Transnistria would be granted considerable influence on the policy of the central government in Chisinau. And please have in mind that up until now, almost all forms of Moldo-Transnistrian federation that Russia has proposed was giving Transnistria a right to block actually every inconvenient decision of the Chisinau. From Russian point of view, such situation would be warranted that Moldova would remain neutral state and would probably never be able to integrate deeply with the European structures. What's more, the possibility that Transnistria would change its mind on NATO or EU integration is minimal, while the chance that Moldovans would at some point elect pro-Russian government is pretty high. In other words, Moldo-Transnistrian Federation is the worst-case scenario from Moscow perspective, of course. Moldo-Transnistrian Federation in the worst-case scenario from Moscow perspective, of course, would be unable to go west because of the Transnistrian anchor. And in the best-case scenario, it will be willing for the fully cooperation with Russia, including deep integration with customs union and so on. That's why the federalization of Moldova is such a convenient scenario for the Kremlin. If we look from the Western perspective, we will see that interests of both EU and USA are pretty obvious and that there is no hidden agenda here. West would like to see Moldova reintegrated with Transnistria, as from its perspective the existence of such an outlaw entity virtually at the borders of EU can be, and as we see, it really is, a flashpoint, a source of instability for the entire region. Of course, the West, contrary to Russia, is reluctant to the idea of giving Transnistria a real influence on the policy of Chisinau, especially foreign policy. The best option for this player would be reunification of Transnistria to the unitary Moldovan state as an autonomous region with a wide cultural and economical independence, but certainly without any serious voice. So the option, according to actually the current status from 2005. The federalization is also an option, but in this case Transnistria shouldn't have any special right to block decisions of central government, and her influence on the policy of federalized states should be reflecting her share in the population of such hypothetical federation, which is only about 14%. As you see, ladies and gentlemen, the interests of all three main groups of actors that take part in the Transnistrian conflict resolution process are contradicting each other, which led to the deadlock that we can observe from the very beginning of the negotiations. This deadlock is pretty permanent, but also very turbulent. From time to time we can observe the status quo being shaken by the new crisis, which take place when one corner of this triangle of interest is trying to dominate the other. Usually it's Russia, of course. Well, this is actually how it all works, at least since February 2014. The latest developments on the Crimean Peninsula, however, force us to reconsider Russian interest in this triangle. As I said, for many years Russia was playing on federalization of Moldova to gain a permanent influence on the policy of state and deter Chisinau from integration with Western structures. The Russian annexation of Crimea, as well as the Putin's manifesto on the eve of annexation of Peninsula, showed, however, that Russians have redefined its policy toward the integration of former Soviet republics into the Western structures. There is no doubt in this. It's self-evident in the Crimea and southern Ukraine. Question, however, which remain open is whether Russian policy goals remain the same and only the measures, the means, become harsher, or perhaps Russian goals have changed. In other words, whether by the developments on the Ukraine, Russia is willing to keep the entire country in its sphere of influence and block its integration to the West by, among other things, transferring more power to the regions. If yes, then this means that the intentions, the goal of the policy of Russia, their objectives remain the same, and that only the measures have become changed to much, much harder. On the other hand, maybe Russia have actually given up Ukraine as a whole country and decided that they would simply acquire just those parts of Ukrainian states which are inhabited by Russian-speaking pro-Russian populations. which would be seen like as a punishment for Ukraine for going west, like Mr. Sokol was saying. This would mean that the very goal of the policy of Russia has changed, and that we can expect similar approach of Russia to the Moldovan case. With those questions in mind, we can try to speculate a bit about the further developments of the Transnistrian problem in the nearest future. If Russia's main goal is still to keep post-Soviet states of Eastern Europe neutral and away from the European Union, then we must assume that in just few next week Russia would intensify its action aimed at blocking the signing of association agreement between Moldova and Chisinau. I mean, intensify more than it is already intensified. It would not be an easy task, however, as there are only about 6 weeks left to do this. Using an economical pressure, another embargo, or even an attempt to extract Moldovan migrants from Russia are not an instrument that would work fast enough. Cutting the gas supplies is also almost impossible at the moment, as Moldova do have prolonged contract with Gazprom, valid until the end of 2014. Some would say that perhaps Russia would like to provoke serious unrest in Transnistria, including fire exchange with casualties, or maybe it will be trying to repeat Crimean scenario in Gagauzia by sending the well-known green memes. Well, it all may be, but it seems that neither of those scenarios could stop signing of the agreement with the EU. There is another option, however. It seems possible that this time Russia will try to use the international situation it has created to push through her vision of the Transnistrian conflict resolution by federalizing Moldovan state. The framework of such scenario would be as follows. Russia would use the current tension to exert pressure on Western actors, especially USA, and convince them to support or at least not neglecting the idea of federalization of Moldova. This could be achieved by simple blackmail. Well, Russia could say that, you know well that we have forces on the Ukrainian border that are strong enough to push all the way through Transnistria, and you know that we can use them. So either we will agree on the federalization of Moldova or we will be forced to act. And then who knows, maybe Gagauzia would follow, then maybe City of Bells. So from the Western perspective, it would be a choice between federalized Moldova or virtually no Moldova at all. The second option is very inconvenient for Western players, as this would cause very strong tensions between Russia and Romania and probably would also turn the entire area into a region of serious destabilization. Let's then assume that such blackmail would work. What will happen then? Well, Russia would probably start pushing both sides of conflict to sign the agreement, at least some very basic memorandum of understanding which would allow opening serious negotiations on reunification. With this document in hand, Russia would receive strong leverage which would allow to block signing of association agreement. Moscow could argue that association agreement could not be signed at the present time because it seems that the entire construction of a country is going to be changed, that the constitutional system would be altered, and that basically EU don't know with whom it will sign the document. The other argument would be that in case of federalization, many of provisions of this document would become void. Such scenario would bring two benefits for Russia. First, it will block signing of association agreement, and second, it will allow Russia to achieve its old objective of creating federalized, neutral, and East-anchored Moldova. There are certain evidence that such scenario can be deliberated. During talks with Barack Obama on 28-29 March, with Angela Merkel on 31 March, President Putin spoke of the alleged economic and transport blockade of Transnistria resulting from actions taken by Chisinau and Kiev, and emphasized that they need to find a fair and comprehensive solution to the problems posed by this breakaway republic. In turn, Russia Ministry of Foreign Affairs, following the conversation between Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and US Secretary of State John Kerry, announced on 13 March that the two parties had agreed that it was necessary to grant Transnistria special status as a part of the single, sovereign and neutral Moldovan state. International formal talks concerning the Transnistrian issue were planned to continue on 10th and 11 April as a part of the 5+2 format. However, their future is uncertain as Transnistria decided not to take part in the talks. This doesn't mean, however, that talks between US and Russia would not take place a little bit later or on a different occasion. So this was the scenario based on the assumption that Russian strategic objectives have not changed. If it will appear, however, that Russian policy have changed, and that Russian intention is to keep control only over those parts of Moldova and Ukraine inhabited by ethnic Russians or pro-Russian Russian speakers, then in next few months we may witness the annexation of Transnistria into the Russian Federation. This scenario doesn't seem convincing, but it still doesn't mean that it shouldn't be ruled out. It should be ruled out. It is possible that Russia finally realized that her old strategy is not working, that federalization scenario cannot be enforced, and on the other hand, that the simple existence of unrecognized Transnistria, which meant to be the problem for Moldovan European integration, is not holding Moldova from running away from Russia and actually deepening integration with the EU. If this is the case, then Russia may actually decide to change its official position of respecting territorial integrity of Moldova and implement what we can call Crimean scenario in Transnistria. In other words, it can decide on the recognition and subsequent annexation of Transnistria. Moscow may easily argue that according to Russian conception of foreign policy, it was in fact respecting territorial integrity of Moldova. I mean, Moscow was respecting territorial integrity of Moldova as unitary, neutral state. But since Moldova, after signing of association agreement, is no longer neutral state, and from the Russian perspective, sovereign state, not a sovereign state as well, then Russia may reconsider its approach towards Moldovan integrity. Such scenario seems, however, at least from my point of view, very improbable. Such step would not give Russia any visible benefits. Transnistria is not Crimea. It don't have any sentimental value for ordinary Russians, and its reacquiring would not result in a visible rise of support and prestige for Putin among his electorate. It would definitely not stop Moldova from the process of European integration as well. In fact, Chisinau would probably receive additional diplomatic support from Brussels and acceleration of the integration process. Who knows? In such case, Moldova could even receive the membership perspective and count for increased financial assistance from the EU. But if Russia is really interested only in Russian regions of former Soviet Republic, then this would be not an issue for Moscow. But still, incorporation of Transnistria would mean that Russia would deprive herself from one of the most convenient instruments of pressure on Chisinau, which is the existence of unrecognized entity inside the legally recognized border of Moldovan states. It's very possible that such decision would also strongly influence Moldovan electorate, which will increase the support for the pro-European coalition, which in other case could lose the upcoming elections. The only possible but fragile benefits on which Russia could count while deciding on this scenario would be A, provoking unrest in Gagauzia, which probably would also demand incorporation into the Russian Federation, and B, Transnistria as a part of Russia would become a convenient instrument of pressure on Ukraine, because Russia would gain an argument to demand from Kiev free access to its new landlocked enclave. Yet, any of those theoretical benefits don't seem to be very convincing. Of course, there's also the last, third scenario, which is basically a combination of those two I've just mentioned. Russia may actually, following current Ukrainian scenario, recognize Transnistria, conduct annexation, and then still play on the regionalization of Moldova by fueling separatism in Gagauzia and, for example, in the north of the country, around the city of Belz. Not to mention Taraklia district, for example. It is possible, but from my perspective, also rather unlikely. Separatism in the northern Moldova cannot be compared to that in Donetsk, and Gagauz's autonomy seems too small and irrelevant to be able to play a serious role. But of course, nothing can be truly ruled out. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention. Sorry for being such a quick speaker.
Thank you. What a concentrated and efficient use of time. So much information back into it. Your analysis of reasons why it is so difficult to resolve. We'll come back to discuss this question after our second presentation, and now I give the floor to Greta Monica Tuchkute, Director of the Center for Geopolitical Studies, who will talk about geopolitical context of the frozen conflicts in Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Moldova.
Thank you, Mantas. Thank you very much for inviting to this interesting and fruitful discussion. And I will not be so concentrated in my presentation, but I will be more brief, I guess. I would like, in fact, to talk about, in general, geopolitical situation in the post-Soviet space, in the former Soviet space, and what are the roles of the main players in this sphere, and why those frozen conflicts or unsolved conflicts are still in the post-Soviet space. And when I was thinking about my presentation, I remembered last week events in Lithuania, that we were commemorating the anniversary of the 10th year of accession of Lithuania to NATO. And I think for us, as for our country, and for the other countries who were accessing NATO at that time, it's a very important date. And it's an important date also for all the international relations context. Because at that time, 10 years ago, there was drawn a line across the continent, I would say. And at that time, some former Soviet countries were accessing the organization which is supposed to protect, which is supposed to give some guarantees. And now we're again on the crossroad. How further the future of some countries will be developing. And the situation is, as everybody knows, and as we were talking already all day long today, that there are many unsolved conflicts in the post-Soviet space. And there is always this one dominating player, which is Russia, which is trying to foster these frozen or unsolved conflicts in the post-Soviet space. And today we were questioning a lot why Russia is doing this. It's clear why Russia is doing this, and why European Union or NATO doesn't do anything against these kind of situations. And I agree with Mr. James that it's difficult to do something about it in the post-Soviet space, where Russia has already the dominating position. But on the other hand, nevertheless, the European Union and NATO are doing something. And these actions can be visible and can be seen. For instance, a lot of hopes are put in the place to the Wales summit of NATO in September, which is going to take place in Wales. There is some hope that maybe Georgia will get some better status than Georgia has at this moment. Most probably there will be some more sanctions done from the European Union side in regards of Crimea and in regards of Ukraine. Not in regards of Crimea. Crimea most probably is for some time will be a place which will not be so easily, let's say, accessible. Exactly. But the situation is that everything doesn't look only black or white, and of course there should be more measures done, and more measures can be done. And the role of these countries as Lithuania or the countries which were accessing NATO 10 years ago, which do not have so much power, let's say in military terms talking or in economic terms talking, but still in the political terms talking, we can have our voice, and we can have our position passed in the dialogue between big deciding powers. But the question is, what are these measures that can be applied and that could better control, could make better Russia understand that Russia is not the only country which can decide about the future of the other countries, and which is not acceptable that Russia is doing such a precedent actions as they did with Crimea. And these measures are economic measures, I would say, economic and energy security measures. Because Russia, we should notice, and we didn't talk about this a lot, but Russia has very deep economic problems itself. And it has very big social problems itself. It has demographic problems itself. And Russia is doing these aggression actions always when it has very big problems. I mean, it's a kind of rule that when Russia has a problem, Russia starts to find some enemies. In 2008, Russia found Georgia and attacked Georgia by saying, oh, Georgia is our biggest enemy, now we have to solve this problem. At this moment, it's Ukraine, which is being attacked, and the rest of the world is sitting and waiting what to do. So if I understand that NATO is afraid to intervene, or Americans are afraid to have a harder word in this kind of situation, because nobody knows how Russia would act afterwards. Everybody is afraid to give more commitment in military terms, talking or talking in hard power terms. But there are some economic measures which can be applied, and also even in terms of military measures can be said that, for instance, in Poti could be the plans of establishing the NATO base or whatever could be implemented. Or, for instance, that the energy projects of pipelines should be finally pushed through the, let's say, through the south part of Europe, and European Union can do also some measures, apply some measures in regards of the Gazprom's policies in Europe, and these are the tools that can control Russia. These are the tools can make Russia understand that it's not the only country which can dictate the rules. The other thing is that Russia, of course, and with Putin in front of Russia, understands better the hard talk language than the nice diplomatic rhetorics. And in this case, Russia should be told what kind of consequences might have. I mean, the sanctions for some of the politicians that who cannot enter Western Europe, they are not enough. Should be the sanctions done on the companies, on the big businesses, which can have effect on a bigger amount of the people. And these big businesses can be Gazprom, for instance. But nobody is talking at this moment about this. And our mission, the mission of, let's say, independent countries, nevertheless they are small or big or powerful or not very powerful. Our mission is to talk about this and to try to persuade the central governments of the European Union, of governments of the United States that we need to do some tangible actions which could have effect. And of course, before preparing for my presentation, I was thinking about United States' role in the region. And Obama's government, everybody can agree that the reset policies and withdrawal of United States from the region made some effect. And perhaps this is the good timing again to come back with similar policies which were implemented before, and to have this balance, the geopolitical balance, more balanced in the post-Soviet space. So I would like to perhaps to conclude with my presentation and I will not keep you longer after lunch on this Friday afternoon, but I think the civil society, as Vytis, for instance, was mentioning, that civil society is very important, has important role to play in this kind of situations. Civil society indeed has important role to play, but with the aid and help of decision makers. And we are, as civil society, we can influence these decision makers, and I would like to invite into, as civil society representatives to try to do some actions, participating in the public movements and public statements, helping the decision makers to understand that now it's the time to act, and it's a very good timing to act, in fact, because now it's when the post-Soviet space world is again reforming, and we have a possibility to reform it in a better way. Thank you.
The crux, I mean, the issue, what sort of scenario is Putin playing at, and what is the sort of the score sheet, and your argument assumes that it is a sort of short-termist, that it is just a response to some sort of internal crisis, that Crimea is motivated by Bolotnaya, and fear of this sort of transference of Maidan into the heartland. But in fact, as the discussion that we already started last night is sort of looks at the possibilities of much longer range scenarios where. And I think Camille's analysis presupposes a much sort of longer perspective scenario where it's not the immediate kind of crisis that Putin's internal policy crisis that Putin is trying to resolve, but actually to put chess pieces in place for a longer game and a longer chess game. And I think Irakli's metaphor of Putin playing white, and then the West is only sort of kind of responding to his moves is very appropriate here. Right, with these thoughts in mind, we'll just put now both presentations on the table for discussions and reactions, and I wait for your initiatives. Yes, Vladimir.
About Moldova. The conflict has been redefined by Western diplomacy in the last 10 years at least, if not more, as an internal Moldovan conflict between two banks of the Dnistru River. This is a complete misdefinition of the conflict. What we have is an interstate conflict between Russia and Moldova, with Russia maintaining troops on the territory of the Republic of Moldova since 1992. And the ceasefire agreement of 1992 was signed by the presidents of Russia and Moldova. And this is the conflict. At international conferences, we hear the conflict being discussed as if it were an internal conflict. In Chisinau in December of last year, I attended a conference panel with 4 European Union countries' ambassadors to Moldova, all of whom referred only to a conflict between Tiraspol and Chisinau, not even mentioning Russia. This is the extent to which the conflict has been redefined in order to absolve Russia from political responsibility and make it easier for Western diplomacy to disengage. Russia does say that it respects the territorial integrity of Moldova on paper, but in practice it prevents the Republic of Moldova from exercising the sovereignty of Moldova on the left bank, that sovereignty which Russia says it respects. Federalization. Russia proposed federalization type, or rather confederalization type solutions in 1998 to Moldova, Georgia, and Azerbaijan in the form of the common state proposed by Evgeny Primakov at that stage. Georgia and Azerbaijan rightly rejected it. Moldova accepted it. But it accepted it only in a document which has had no follow-up and no consequence, and it is now simply a document in the archives, which does not influence the course of the present negotiations. What does influence the course is Russia's almost permanent proposal for federalization, based on versions of the Cossack Memorandum from 2003, updated versions which are from time to time repeated in confidential diplomatic conversations. In my view, the real danger is not federalization, which Moldova rejects and will never accept, but it is a different kind of settlement, which I would describe as cantonalization, involving a division of Moldova's territory into a number of territorial units based on ethnic linguistic criteria. Gagauzia would be one of them. Then there is, next to Gagauzia, a Bulgarian majority district, Taraklia, which is a candidate for becoming a canton type unit, and the Russified, not Russian, but Russified city of Belzi, in northern Moldova. The Russians are promoting this type of solution, especially during the last year or so, when Russia intensely promotes the idea of local referendums, which Russia now promotes in Moldova and Ukraine. Russia has two federalization projects on the entire Eurasian and European space. Russia has two federalization projects in Ukraine and Moldova. In Moldova, it dates back to a number of years, as I mentioned. In Ukraine, it is a brand new project. If Western powers accept federalization of Ukraine, then irresistible pressure would be placed on Moldova to federalize or to cantonalize in the same way. This is not an inevitable or necessary development. I do not agree with the assumption that Transnistria's population is pro-Russia. The Tiraspol leadership is pro-Russia. The population is not pro-Russia. 40% approximately of Transnistria's populations are ethnic Moldovans. They are politically passive, very backward in socioeconomic terms, have no voice in decision-making, but still they are 40% of the total population. There are more Ukrainians in Transnistria than there are Russians. Russians are only the third largest element in Transnistria. There is no social or political base for pro-Russian sentiment in Transnistria, except in the Russian-dominated city of Tiraspol, not in the territory. However, there is genuine pro-Russian sentiment in Gagauzia and nearby Bulgarian Taraklia. There is genuine pro-Russian sentiment which dates back from the time of the Russian Empire, which colonized those two population groups in southern Bessarabia with generous allotments of land and exemptions from taxation and military service. So that's where pro-Russia sentiment is. And in the northern city of Belzi, where Ukrainians are outnumbering Russians, but are linguistically Russified, there the identity of the local population is a Soviet identity. Not national, pre-national, or post-national, but not national, and it's a Soviet type of mentality. This would create a basis for cantonalization of Moldova, which would be a more realistic scenario than federalization because it could create chaos on the right bank. The Russians could play this card on the right bank. And a final word moving to Ukraine. The idea of federalizing Ukraine. I regard this as dangerous only in the event that the United States goes along with this solution and enables Russia to present such a solution to Ukraine as a joint Russian-American proposal, or at least as a Russian proposal with American assent. This is the subject of negotiations between Putin and Obama by telephone and in the Lavrov-Kerry meetings. The United States has accepted the Russian proposal to federalize Ukraine as a topic of negotiations. It has not accepted the proposal. It has accepted to discuss this proposal. And in the ideal case for Russia, a proposal seen to have American and German assent would be very difficult by Kiev to reject. Notably, US diplomacy promoted federalization of Moldova in the period 2002-2005, which explains Moldova's rejection of Moldova's parliamentary vote to reject federalization in 2005. It was a defense against a Russian proposal to federalize Moldova, promoted in Chisinau by the American-led mission of the OSCE with the approval of the State Department. It was a transitory stage, but the American position remains unclear, and I don't rule out the possibility that the United States might, as a desperate solution, or a desperate option, accept federalization. Conversely, just as acceptance of the Russian proposal in Ukraine would create irresistible pressures on Moldova, conversely, acceptance of it in Moldova would become a dangerous precedent for Ukraine. So I do think that Western diplomacy should treat these two issues as a block of issues, not separately from each other, but as a block of issues, and reject both proposals on the same grounds, because the grounds for rejecting the proposals are common. Thank you.
Can I have a follow-up question to you? And what is your reaction to one of scenarios that Camille discussed? It's sort of Kaliningradization of Transnistria.
I already described a few years ago. I started describing Transnistria as an equivalent of Kaliningrad, meaning a Russian-controlled militarized exclave remotely controlled from Moscow. So yes, there is already, we have a Kaliningrad in Transnistria, but it's not a Kaliningrad recognized in international law. Unfortunately, the existing Kaliningrad has an international legal status, which is a deplorable thing. It's a perversity, actually. But it is internationally legal. Transnistria is not. Federalization of Moldova would not make Transnistria, would not give legal status to a Kaliningradization of Transnistria. It would still be part of Moldova theoretically, but it would be in practice remote controlled by Russia. If that happens, then, irrespective of what happens in Ukraine, if Transnistria is federalized with Moldova, or even officially separated from Moldova, then pressure will build on Ukraine to allow Russia to open an overland corridor from Crimea to Transnistria. So this would be highly destabilizing, and it's one more grounds for rejecting both federalization proposals of Russia, both for Ukraine and for Moldova. They should be treated as a package of proposals and rejected on the same grounds in each case, in either case.
Thank you very much. I want to welcome Ambassador, His Excellency Igor Klipi, Ambassador of Moldova to Lithuania, who's joined us during the discussion. I'm sure he will want to intervene on this topic. But in the meanwhile, my colleague from the Parliament, Egidius Vareikis, wants to come in. Yes, please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I see what we have here, very informal meeting. So I have to say, but I'm not representing anybody, instead myself. I'm a member of parliament of this country. And what I see, I am following the so-called frozen conflict for many years. For 5 years, I was the rapporteur of Council of Europe in Moldova, so I visited Transnistria several times. I'm quite familiar with Karabakh case as well as a Georgian problem. And also I am now the rapporteur of Council of Europe in Bosnia and Herzegovina, which is also a very specific case. And what is my general opinion is, what we are probably sometimes on the wrong way. You know, I'm participating in the numerous conferences of this conflict, and sometimes I have impression, but we are not discussing how to solve the frozen conflict or how to live with the frozen conflict. And all our methodology is how to talk, and how to talk much and to do really nothing. And I would say that how to discuss with Smirnov, how to discuss with the Georgian local dictators, but not how to remove them. So this is, I think, this is the essence. And I like the sentence. I like the sentence, solve the conflicts with the peaceful means. But in my mind, the sentence sounds like maintain the conflict in the peaceful means. And being not very politically correct here, not very politically polite, I remember also the frozen conflicts in former Yugoslavia, you know, the Serbian Krajinas in Croatia. It's supposed to be the frozen conflict with their local artificial presidents and governments. But what the Croatian state did, finally they applied the military solution, and the conflict was solved. We have no frozen conflicts in that country. So this is something what we are afraid to say. And I'm always remember Ronald Reagan, the American president, who simply said to Gorbachev, remove that wall, not discuss how to maintain and how to speak across the wall. So this is, I think, sometimes we are too soft, and when we permit Russia to be the decision maker in Transnistria, why Russia is 1,000 kilometers away, but is still the decision maker. You know, in this country, how to do that? I will explain. Sometimes people do not believe how Russians withdraw their armed forces from Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia when we have no single armored vehicle. So we can create the political situation like that. But instead of creating that political situation, we are creating the different political situation, how to permit Russia to play with the white figures in that chess game. So, of course, maybe it looks very, very politically incorrect, but we have to speak really how to remove these, you know, small entities, what we call frozen conflicts, without the permission of Russia. Thank you.
Well, that should put a cat among the pigeons. Yes.
Just a small remark in the end. Dugin's geopolitical theory, if to read and to follow. I mean, Russia is exactly playing according to this kind of theory. I mean, what we should do from our side is we should act against the Dugin's geopolitical theory. I mean, if Dugin is expecting Lithuania and Poland to fight against each other, on the opposite, Lithuania and Poland should make a very strong alliance and go against the Russian expectations. The same is, for instance, in South Caucasus case. I mean, if Russia is expecting, let's say, Azerbaijan to be in the conflict together with Armenia, Armenia, for instance, should consider also the other kind of solution, not the status quo that is now in Nagorno-Karabakh. The same for Azerbaijan, although I know that there were some measures done in order to solve the unsolved situation. But what I mean is that the long-term planning, of course, Russia has. But also we should not think that Russia is only acting according to the long-term planning that has a very long vision, and it follows that vision very strongly. No, there are some basic principles that Russia is following, and Putin has also his own personality, and together with his office, which are following some kind of complex of let's say, superiority, and they would like to dominate all over the region. However, what we have to do is to act against their expectations, and if they expect the Western to be very soft, we should not be so soft. On the opposite, we should be harder. So this is my main idea. Thank you.
My name is Liudas Danavičius. I am from the Lithuanian Military Academy, and I have two more specific questions, maybe particularly to our Polish colleague, about the Transnistrian situation. First question would be, what is the dynamics of the Russian military presence in the region? You know, all this post-Stambul and so on. And another question about, you already mentioned the economic support for the region from Russia with payments and non-payments for gas and similar issues. But in general, how you evaluate the economic situation of Transnistria? It is stable, competitiveness of those major industrial plants. Of course, there are not so many, but still some source for revenues. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, actually, speaking about military presence, there's not much of dynamics there. I mean, there are like two separate organizations. There are peacekeeping forces, which are there with a mandate of the Commonwealth of Independent States, on the one hand, and there's a limited group of army, what left from the 14th Army, which main task is theoretically to secure the ammunition stock in Kolbasna. Generally, it's about 1,500, 1,200 soldiers, more or less, actually. The very ammunition depot in Kolbasna is pretty interesting, actually, because it's really a huge amount of weaponry, and this is actually the main reason why Russia justify its military presence there. I mean, there were Istanbul agreement, yes, and actually it's long gone. I mean, the deadline has been long gone, but Russians are still arguing that they simply cannot leave this place because there is a lot of ammunition there, and they cannot bring this through the Ukraine because Ukraine is not letting them, and so on and so forth. So this is an excuse which they are using there. And speaking about the economical situation of Transnistria, well, this is actually a pretty complex issue, but let's start with a general assumption that it's very bad. Generally speaking, backbone of Transnistrian economies are like 4 great factories from the Soviet times. It's the steel mill, it's the cement yard, and so on and so forth. Most of those companies were actually not working last year due to the various reasons. For example, due to the rise of the gas price, but not made by Russians, because as I said, technically this gas is free, but by the very Shevchuk himself. I mean, Shevchuk, who was trying to some way repair the budget of the Republic, actually raised the gas prices for the companies, and this actually rendered them totally uncompetitive. So most of them are actually uncompetitive. Most of them are actually not working on their full with their full potential. There is an electric plant, the huge one, which is actually Moldavskaya Gres, which was actually sending a huge amount of electricity to Moldova as well, but this is also declining. Actually, the only company which is really working really good, I mean, it's actually a group of companies, are the part of the Sheriff Holding. So it's a very Sheriff Holding, but it's, I don't know, Tiratex, for example, the company which products textiles, and there is Xint, so the spirit company which is producing cognacs and so on and so forth. So they are actually more or less functioning and earning money for them. But the rest of the economy is really in a very bad shape, and therefore Transnistria really needs transfer of money from Russia, and it receives it on a very different level. So it's humanitarian aid, it's direct investments made by the so-called Евразийская Integracja. There's an organization which is dealing with money from Russia, which is building, I don't know, schools and so on and so forth. And of course the gas itself, which is the biggest part of the Russian aid. I don't remember the very numbers right now, but it would be at least like $300 million a year if we will count that they are receiving gas but they are not paying for this. So this is in general terms actually.
Thank you. Any more questions or interventions? Yes, please, Mr. Nikolai.
Victor Nikolai, Embassy of Moldova. I would like to comment with a few words. First of all, I would like to thank Kamil for his communication, which is interesting and I would say objective. Of course, we could say that all frozen conflicts have different roots, but are inspired from abroad, of course, from the same actor. Some analysts, Mr. Sokor, for instance, said us that we have to negotiate direct with Moscow, probably not with Tiraspol. It's an opinion, it's an interesting opinion, because as we now the agreement of ceasefire was signed between the president of Moldova and Russia, between Snegur and Yeltsin, and the Russian 14th Army was involved directly in the conflict. So it seems to be that Russia is interesting that Moldova should continue negotiations with Tiraspol, because this kind of negotiations it seems to be never-ending negotiations. We can see the last time the kind of duplicity of policy of Russian, not in the last time, but always, I would say, because during the meeting with Minister German and during the meeting with Germans, Lavrov declared that Russia is open and is ready to negotiate a special status of Transnistria, to find a solution, to be to support the integrity of Moldova, but on another hand, we a few days ago heard that so-called Minister of Foreign Affairs from Tiraspol, Stanskynina, declared that Transnistria will leave format of negotiation 5+2. Of course, this is decision was probably being advised from abroad again to leave the negotiation process. As you know, the official position of the government of Moldova is to apply small steps, a strategy of small steps, and to build, first of all, bridges between peoples from both banks of Nistru River, and to tackle economic issues, first of all, and after that, political one, maybe to leave this for the better time. I would like to thank Mr. Vladimir Sokor for his valuable ideas and advices. I have read an interview of Mr. Sokor a few weeks ago, and we could agree with his points that Moldova should not more mention that Russia is a garant of conflict resolution, because Moscow could believe indeed that they have all rights to act and to do this in its manner. And thank you very much once again.
Thank you. Thank you. Any reactions or? Well, in that case, I think with your thanks, Mr. Nicolai, we are sort of nearing the roundup of today's discussions. And thank you. I thank all the contributors and discutants on for their input and their remarks. And we'll continue this tomorrow. Today was the day which was looking at a closer focus at particular sort of conflicts from particular sites of conflicts. Tomorrow we'll have a series of presentations which, at least the title suggests, they will take a broader look, and I'm sure it's going to be no less stimulating than it was today. So thank you all very much, and see you tomorrow at 10. Thank you.